Hey guys, and I just realized I've destroyed my view. I was like, I'm going to go to my view where I'm a little box on the side there and the bigger box is there. So I'm going to have to make that. Sorry about that. When I was doing my debate yesterday, or when I was running the debate, I cleaned up a whole bunch of boxes that I thought were redundant. And so I'm just going to float around the page here a little bit and see, no, I don't have anything like that. I've deleted it. And so I'll create a new layout at the camera shot. And then I will add the media slot. There we go. I'll make that nice and big. Oh, that's cool. I can make that huge. I'll make it a little bit bigger than usual because I don't have to be that big because I'm just yapping on. But it's good to see the more famous crew there. That's pretty good. Yeah. Okay, I'll save that. Custom layout 9, that'll do. Okay, where's my custom layout 9? There, cool. And I'm a tiny little dude over here. Yeah, welcome out. Welcome out to Revolution. We're going to go through this video. Wes Huff just destroyed popular Bible manuscript myth. And so this is from God Bless Studios. He has 341,000 subscribers. And he oftentimes likes to put up clips about Wes Huff and say, wow, look, Wes Huff is the bee's knees. He's the best. He's the guru. But we're going to go through and just show you guys that Wes Huff really, he does know what he's talking about. I usually give people too much benefit. I give them a benefit of the doubt too often. And he is a critical text advocate to the back teeth. He is going to talk about, a whole bunch of things which we know are untrue. You don't even have to be a Textus Receptus guy or a King James advocate to know that he's wrong. But we're going to go through this. This is a really good example. Now, the reason I'm not going through the whole entire video, which I only just watched this morning on 2-speed, I had gone through this one that we're about to go through, which goes for 13 minutes on God Bless Studios, because he summarizes just the biblical sections where he's talking about King James, talking about Byzantine texts and things like that. And so he sort of summarizes that and offers his own little opinions every now and then. And obviously he's in favor of Wes. But I thought, well, I better go through the whole section on Mikhaila Peterson's program. So I went through that whole section. It goes for like an hour and 25. So I put it on double time. And really that there wasn't that much else discussed that we should really talk about. I mean, they just sort of talked about, is once saved, always saved? Do people who commit suicide go to heaven or hell? And this type of thing. I mean, Wes Huff's sort of like, if you don't believe in hell, you're not a heretic. It's like, oh, okay, that's one of my alarm bells that goes off. I've often said Tommy Wasserman doesn't believe in hell. I would say that he's a heretic. But I guess, when you're in with the Bible Societies, United Bible Societies, and you're with that crew, I mean, you're usually hanging around people who are heretics. So you go, well, he's such a nice guy. Why would you think that he's a heretic? And they tick all the other boxes except they don't believe the Trinity or something like that. So, they usually make their circle bigger. And I remember a pastor told me one time, he said, Nick, you just need to make your circle bigger. Your circle's too small. And in that context, he was telling me how Seventh-day Adventists had given him money for a church project. And he said, the moral of the story is you just got to make your circle bigger. And I was like, no, just have your circle as big as the Bible tells you to have your circle. A heretic after first and second admonition reject. And so, anyway, I had a great time yesterday going through or hosting the debate between Bible Protector and Bible Highlighter. One of the things is when you're a moderator, you don't usually get time to actually sit back and and look at all the argumentation, you're constantly going, okay, well, I've got to have this camera angle. You're sort of like a producer. You're doing, zoom in, zoom outs. You're writing down things. You're looking at questions. You don't want to just put up a question that's really silly and you're like, oh, I didn't read it, So you've got to have your mind on different things. So you only get about 20% of what's actually being said. And so I will go back through that during this next week and have a good listen to it and look at all the argumentation in context. But I had fun doing that. That was great. And so I know I'm starting a little bit late. We went up to Brisbane and we were so rushed. We went up to Brisbane and then we came back. I got like 4 hours sleep, did the debate, and then slept for like 11 hours straight. And then I couldn't sleep like at night at the proper time. And so, yeah, I've just had this weird sort of thing where I've been missing out on sleep, but then catching up on sleep and running around like a headless chook, really. But I've been enjoying doing stuff online. Now, I know a lot of people have contacted me and said my website's down at the moment. There has been some sort of hack into cPanel, and the guys who run my server, they're the biggest company in Australia who run servers. So they're running my server, and they contacted me saying for the safety of the material on my server, they've taken my sites down. Now, they did put it up for a second there, then they took it down. And now I realize it says the cPanel license has expired. I'm not sure if that's part of the hack to get people to update things and put their credit card details somewhere. But usually I don't have to deal with any of that. And so anyway, that's one thing that's happening. Also, rebuilding my website. I'm doing it on my computer. I remember when I used to work in IT, this is going back like 2008, we used to have our own internal server. And we ran an external server in the same place that I still run my server, actually. And we used to use Dreamweaver and do websites and save them onto our local server and then upload them up. So that way we had backups on our computer. We have backups on our server. We have backups on the external server, which is in Sydney. And that was great. So I actually want to set that up again because my website's gotten so big. And I haven't updated it since 2008. And so being a wiki site, they often have updates. I didn't know how to do the updates. And so I just have never done them. And it's gotten to the point where people jump on there and pages fail. There's all sorts of problems. It usually says as resource limit has been exceeded. And so there's just too many people on the website, where the modern wikis, they deal with those problems better. And so, so that's part of what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm spending a lot of time doing that, which is it's a lot of headache. But I'm sort of seeing that at the end of the day, I'm going to have it's a huge site. It's got really good SEO. A lot of people when they type in Revelation 16:5, 1 John 5:7, oftentimes I'm first or second, third. It depends which browser you use. Edge seems to favor me. I don't use Edge. I use Chrome, mostly Google. But Edge seems to put me up first, which is great. On a lot of verses and a lot of places, Textus Receptus related arguments. But so anyway, apart from that, there is one other announcement. Now I might just quickly get this picture up. And being the studious guy he is, Bible Predictor yesterday pointed out that I had an error in my little picture here that I'm about to show you. Where is it? And I told him the story about this, that this picture, I had, I said to ChatGPT, I said, make me a really cool, AI generated advertisement for the 1 John 5:7 online conference. And so what it kept doing, it kept saying, there are 3 that bear record in heaven, and we know the verse there. But verse 8, it kept saying, there are 3 that bear record in earth. And I kept saying to it, I told it like 10 times, look, change that. And it kept saying, instead of witness, it kept saying record. And I was I was bashing ChatGPT. I was like, why are you doing this? Are you so stupid? I was treating it pretty poorly. And eventually I got irritated by it, and I just copied and pasted it from Crossway or whatever, some Bible website. And I just copied and pasted it there. And Bible Highlighter said, hey, you've got the capital S in spirit there, here. And it should be small. And I know that, and so I was like, yeah. And I had to tell him the story. But so anyway, I did about 10 versions of this flyer, and it just had all sorts of weird nonsense. It had old Bibles, and it was showing the wrong verse and pointing it out and highlighting manuscripts with gibberish on it. And so I was just like, get rid of all that. And so anyway, what is this? This is the 1 John 5, 7-8 conference. So the Comma Johanneum conference. And we already have a ton of speakers. So Jeff Riddle's on board, Bryan Ross is on board, Peter Van Cleek Sr., Peter Van Cleek Jr. I asked Will Kenny, he said he can't do it. I asked Chris Yetzer, he can't do it. We have Mike Ferrando, Mike Holner. So we've got a ton of people involved with this. So we're going to do an online conference. It's going to happen over the weekend of September the 10th, September the 11th. Now, I know that's usually a weekend where everyone's focusing on tragedies. Charlie Kirk was killed September the 10th. September the 11th, the Twin Towers went down. And so these are issues. But according to my sources, which is ChatGPT, I was asking it, what is one of the best weekends to do this, where there's no big events on, no big Bible conferences on, where people aren't going to be busy. And I put in a bunch of names and got it to search for things, and it said that weekend was fine. But because it's an online conference, we can always pre-record stuff. So I think talking with Bryan Ross, he said that he probably will want to pre-record, and so that'll be fine. And so we can just make that a premiere. We can all watch it, get some popcorn out, watch what he's got to say about things. And so all I've done at the moment, I've just solidified that we've got a ton of speakers now. I told them to sort of say whatever they want about 1 John 5, 7-8, but I don't want to make the conference redundant and everyone just sort of say the same thing or just summarize everything. Or I really want people to, they've got 5 months, I guess, to work some things out. And so it'll be great for people to focus in and also have their strengths. Some of these guys have really good strengths in certain areas, like obviously Mike Ferrando, he's written The Witness of God is Greater, amazing book, amazing resource about the comma. Mike Holner, he's doing that type of work. Talking to Mike Holner yesterday, he said they've actually found other manuscripts with the comma in it. So this is like groundbreaking news sort of thing. I don't know anything about it. That's all I know. And so they're saying, well, should we keep this till the conference? But I wouldn't. I would just let it out now, because then we can talk about it. Then we can preach on it. And so, but anyway, we're working those things out. But what I've got to make sure is that people aren't just doubling up, because we don't want to have, 3 guys talk about the grammatical issues and it's all pretty much the same stuff. But that's fine if they touch on it, but not like a whole session where it's going to be the same. So I'm going to sort of try and, if someone is doing that, I might get them to also focus on something else. So there's a bit of a balance there. But hopefully we can all sort of discuss together and chat together and say, okay, well, how about I'll talk about this and I'll talk about that. But I do want people to focus on their strengths and not to sort of reinvent the wheel. Some of these guys already have a really good argument for 1 John 5, 7-8. So this is coming up. So this is going to be in about 5 months. So we've got quite a bit of time to prepare. I don't think I've done anything that's had so much traction. So this is probably going to be one of the biggest things I've ever done that has popularity behind it. I guess it is the most talked about variant in the New Testament. It's usually the litmus test if people want to know if someone's a TR person or a King James person or a Byzantine guy or a critical text guy. Usually this verse gets brought up. And so, yeah, this is going to be very good. So I can't stop thinking about this. This is going to be a huge thing, and so we're looking at least 9, maybe 10 speakers, at least an hour. So there's 10 hours just there. And I said to them, look, if you have to go longer, 2 or even into 3 hours, go for it. But there's gonna have to be limitations, and I guess people are going to have to know how long they're going to talk for before they do it. And so I guess an hour and a half to 2 hours should be sufficient for everyone. Most people will probably go for like an hour and 20 minutes, but there's, maybe 10 to 15 hours of high quality, in-depth information about 1 John 5:7. And the thing is too, we've asked people from all backgrounds. And so we've got people who are, like Jeff Riddle, we've got people like Peter Van Cleek, we've got people like Mike Ferrando, myself, I'm talking about that. So it's going to be very interesting. So anyway, that's the only bit of advertising that I really need to do. I'll put that down, and we're going to examine this video today. So I'll go through some of the comments. Hudson is in the house on this topic. Bold as a Lion says, oh, what a pleasant surprise. Hey, Nick. Bold was in the chat yesterday. Hey, Hudson. Everyone's just saying hello. Top Priority Ministries says, Wes Huff is also a Calvinist dung god worshipper. Okay, so you can tell that Top Priority Ministries is not into Calvinism. And they did talk about Calvinism later on in the original video, but I thought, we can talk about those type of issues anytime. I'd rather just focus on the textual issues at the moment. Bold Alliance says, are you recovered from your long discussion yesterday? So, oh yeah, Bible Highlighter is in the house. There we go. And so I thought Bible Highlighter did a very good job yesterday. And like I said, when you're moderating, I know people just see my face and I'm just looking like this, and it looks like I'm just as interested as they are. But behind the scenes, I'm like ticking boxes and, clicking on things and looking things up and just writing down questions and all sorts of things. And so it is quite a job. It's like you're a sound producer. You don't get to enjoy the concert. You're just working. And I guess the more that you do it, the better you get at it. But usually I'm just nervous, thinking because I've looked back on some of the debates that I've done, and someone's talking and I don't even have their face. I've got someone else's face, and it goes for like 5 minutes, and then I'm like halfway through, like, oh, I'm supposed to show the other guy. Click, just one little click or one mute can destroy things. And so there's quite a lot of pressure, but I do enjoy it. Everyday Man of God Ministries is in the house. Good morning, Nick and everyone, or good evening, Nick. Bold as a Lion is just loving that. And another live stream. What a treat. Hello, all. Hello, fellow Floridarian guy from Florida. I'll just say that. I use Canva to fix issues. Okay, Canva. Hey, Bold. Okay, so yeah, fixing it with Canva. Yeah, that's. I did have a subscription to Canva, but I didn't use it. And so I've got Adobe Illustrator, which is quite good. They have Adobe Express, but yeah, sometimes ChatGPT can be a bit funny. But what I've done, I've written out a huge prompt and given it a name. And so when I'm doing study, I put in this name and say, act like this, and it knows exactly what I'm prompting. So, which is pretty cool. At least when I'm doing research and things like that. Bold says, I don't know anything about Mikhaila. I don't really either. I know that she had, I think, some autoimmune disorders or something like that. And she started doing the carnivore thing like her dad. Now I'm doing carnivore as well, which is just basically you just eat meat and drink water. Lots of salt, lots of meat, lots of water. And every now and then just pop a Barocca. So you just, if there's any vitamins that you're sort of lacking or whatever, you'll get it. And it's a great way to lose weight. But a lot of people say that it really helps with any type of disorders, where I don't have any of those things. I just put on weight really easily. So I thought, well, I'll just go carnivore. So I've been doing that for about 6 weeks now properly. I was doing it for about a year, but not doing it properly. I was just cheating every weekend, which wasn't good. But I know that she did a few videos on that, and that caused that issue to become popular. And I guess her dad, Jordan Peterson, he's very well known. But so I don't really know anything else about her. Apparently, she's just become a Christian in the last few years. But she was I think she's become a Calvinist in a sense, where she was saying, I thought I was a Christian, but then I discovered that I didn't choose to be saved. God saved me, and now I'm really a Christian. I guess it's a bit like Justin Peters. No, not Justin Peters. Was it Justin Peters? Yeah, I think it was. His wife, I listened to her testimony once, and it was pretty full on. She was a missionary, but then she realized that God saved her. She didn't save herself by repenting or whatever, and it was the Calvinistic thing, and that's when she got saved. So sometimes the testimonies are that they grew up in church, but then they're like 30 years old and they realize God's sovereign, according to Calvinism, and that's when they got saved. Where sometimes the whole thing about, I was listening to James White the other day, and he was talking about the whole thing about the sovereignty of God that Spurgeon talked about, because a lot of Calvinists would say that someone like me is saved, even though I don't believe in Calvinism. But some Calvinists are like, unless you have Calvinism, you don't have the gospel, and so you're not saved, this type of thing. And so that's a whole issue. But they do talk a tiny little bit about that. Mostly Wes just talking about how God saves us. And the usual, we're doing works or something to get saved. If God commands us to repent and we obey that, well, that's our work sort of thing. Or God has to choose us first, which then opens the whole Pandora's box to like, well, if God chooses us first, then why doesn't he choose this guy? Oh, well, that's the mystery of God, or it's an eternal lottery where your numbers didn't come up and you weren't chosen. Because if it's all up to God, well, why isn't he saving everyone? Why, if he could, wouldn't he? Jesus said for us to love our enemies, do good to those who hate you. If he expects that of us, we would sort of say, well, that's the character and nature of God. Wouldn't he want everyone to be saved if he could save them all, sort of thing? And so it opens up a whole Pandora's box, but obviously that's not something I want to get into today. I need to hire someone. Top Priority Ministry says, I need to hire someone to work on our websites. If anyone is interested or knows someone, please let me know. So what is your website, Top Priority Ministries? Because I'm not even sure who you are. You could be someone who I know very well. Because some people jump on and they're like, the Bible hero or something like that. And it's like, I don't know who they are, but I'm frequently talking to them in a chat. And sometimes too, people will have a different handle here than they have on YouTube, than they have on Facebook. And I'm talking to 3 people thinking it's three different folks, but it's actually the one dude. I had a guy this morning saying, I remember we were chatting about this thing and that thing on Facebook. I'm like, sorry, dude, I have no idea who you are, but that's just the way it is. We're nearly 10,000 people on the Textus Receptus Academy, which is huge. So that's a pretty cool milestone. I've got other pages. The Roman Catholic Church Exposed one that I run, that has like 8,000 people. The Textus Receptus one that I run, that has 7,000. The King James, Daily King James Scriptures has 8,000. So there's probably all up like about 40,000 people, because I run 50 pages, so it's quite a lot. Some of them just have 200, 300, but sometimes too, the 200 and 300 ones, they're interactive and people are focused on the topic. Sometimes you get 8,000 people there and you sort of like, you yell out hello and no one answers. It's like, who are all these people? So I usually tag them as followers for these videos, because I think, okay, well, some people get upset when I put, when I highlight things and put followers onto videos. But when I go through the analytics on YouTube, they'll say, well, 40% of your traffic came from the Textus Receptus Academy page. So I'm like, well, on the ones that I do at followers and they get a notification, they're the ones where everyone jumps on, and they're the ones where they comment down below. The ones that I don't do that, sometimes I'll be here and there's like 10 people the whole time, and it's like, just usual people, which, I don't mind, but obviously we want to grow and we want more people to jump on board and to like things. And Bible Highlighter says, I did slip up saying Yahweh when I meant Jehovah. That's okay. I've done similar things. It's easy to have a slip of the tongue. And I think because you talked about Yahweh being Jupiter, I think people understood straight away, what you were talking about. You and Me says, I guess the old school food pyramid is out the window. Yeah. Yeah, that was the 7 Day Adventists had a lot to do with that, because they wanted to sell a lot of cereal. Yahoo, Hudson, You and Me. Oh no, the Calvinists got to her. Bible Highlighter says Yehovah. Bold's Line says, I fast a lot and eat keto. Okay. Top Priority Ministry says she's not a Christian then. Tribe with Fire says, hello neighbor, bold as a lion and all other brethren gathered here tonight listening to the machine. Nick says, good to see Tribe with Fire. Top Priority Ministry says, if you can't do the one thing that is required, you're not saved by definition. Not that it matters to Lord Dung's decree and evanescent dung sandwich. You and Me says, I can understand someone who says, I don't know if it's monogism or synergism. The problem I have is when they place a certain doctrine over preaching the gospel. Yeah, and I've oftentimes I'd preach at the Gold Coast here in Australia, and I'd go street preaching, and there will be Calvinists there, and so they would usually preach similar things to what I would say, except I would say, when I was preaching John 3:16, which is usually something I would say quite a lot, I would explain that to, whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, is you. It's in the responsibility is for you to respond, sort of thing. And they hated the flyers that we were giving out, which had a big love heart on it with Jesus loves you, because they're like, well, Jesus doesn't love everyone. He hates some people. And it's like, well, he sort of hates everyone, but some people have been chosen from the foundation of the world. And so the other people can never experience the love of God. They just will experience the eternal hate and wrath of God, because it's God's plan. So it was interesting hanging around these guys, because at first you just like, oh, we're sort of preaching the same thing. And I was glad that they're out there, because a lot of people don't go out preaching. But it's usually they sort of preach the same as what we're doing, because if they were to fully preach what they believe, and so this is, I don't know if you know this guy, I'll just put him up. His name's Ryan. So I used to hang around these guys. Need God. Yeah, this needgod.net. And so this guy here, Ryan, and so these guys, they're nice guys, but when you hang around them, you're street preaching and everything, and then you go off and have a coffee later on, or they're dropping people home, or they'll jump in your car and get a lift somewhere, and you're like, you start talking about things, and they'll basically say that what you're preaching was good, but you need to understand that God has chosen you. You need to, and so oftentimes what you'll see is you'll win people over by preaching and doing a whole bunch of stuff. They'll want to hang around on a Friday or Saturday night doing street preaching. They end up hanging around these guys, and then you'll find out, 3 or 4 years later, they've become a Calvinist. So they're sort of actively converting people behind the scenes to the Calvinist position. And, Ryan's church was the one who brought James White over, so that they're obviously involved with that crew. So, yeah, I don't mind preach. Oftentimes I'll preach with anyone. There's not that many street preachers and evangelists around, people doing evangelistic work. So you sort of go, oh, okay, I'll just preach with anyone. But when I first went to the Gold Coast, I was preaching just me, just by myself. I had my speaker there. I just start preaching. And eventually some guys came over, and we were like right on the same page with everything. And so we started hanging around together. But then on the Friday nights, the Calvinists would come, and we would all hang together because these other guys. And so, but looking back, I think I should perhaps have separated myself, because then I'm no longer there, because it's quite a bit of a ride. It's about an hour and a half to go there. I realized that people are like, oh, well, I got saved through Nick or through whoever, but then they're hanging around that crew, and eventually it rubs off and they're all become Calvinists. So I know some people, they're Calvinists watching this, lots of people who I know, and they would be like, well, what's wrong with being convinced into Calvinism? And I'm like, well, I don't agree. I just, like, to me, the whole thing comes down to God predestining people to heaven or hell. Like, I can't, to me, it doesn't match the character of God for that. So usually you have to get rid of the love and mercy of God and his compassion on everyone. You have to get rid of that, and you have to put in that God in the beginning has chosen people to either be predestined to heaven or predestined to hell. And he has designed everything like that and set everything in motion like that. So when these guys go out preaching, they're only thinking, well, maybe there's one person in like 1,000 people who are going to respond, not just because they're preaching, but because God has already preordained them to hear that. And I'm more like, no, any one of these people can respond, sort of thing. So it's very interesting. Comes down to the foreknowledge of God, comes down to the character of God. And so, but that's a whole thing. That could be a whole another topic. I don't mind debating on those sort of things. That's a lot of people, Nick. Good on you. Yeah. So we've got quite a few people jumping on to the 1 John 5:7 conference. Shall Stand Forever says, good evening, everyone. Grace and peace in Christ Jesus. And 1 John 5:8, having spirit capitalized is not a problem in my research. So my 2 cents. Okay. And Shall Stand Forever says, hey, Nick, Calvinists can't say Jesus Christ died for sinners as they preach the gospel. That's the big problem, their view of atonement. I'm sure you know this, brother. Yeah. Oftentimes they would usually people are at a very simplistic level when you're out street preaching. These guys would have a big whiteboard and write on it, or a blackboard with chalk and things, and just have, you're a sinner, and do a bridge thing. Jesus is the bridge, and here's heaven, here's hell, and they would preach. You've got to repent and all this sort of stuff. But so they would use the same language, but there were certain things that have a double meaning. And so it is interesting hanging around Calvinists and seeing how they operate like that. Top Priority Ministry says Calvinists willingly lie. I respect the ones who tell the whole truth and make it crystal clear that we are not brothers. I've tried to get Ryan from near God to prove that his grace isn't evanescent. I think I said effervescent before. Sorry about that. Thanks, Bold. You and me, we call Wes less stuff. You and me, I'm going to make my YouTube handle Sadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, so that it's really long and annoying to type out. Tribal Fire says, hey, everyday man of God ministries. Sorry, I had to walk away for a sec. So these guys are just chatting with each other. Top Priority Ministry says Calvinists attribute the most unclean spirit to God, and it's unforgivable. I think there are some issues, and but the thing is too, like I know there are some people who are Calvinists who I listen to, and I get a lot of very good information from. I think it depends on what church you got saved in or what church you brought up in. It's like if you grew up in the United States or in England or in Australia, you're going to have a certain flavor about you. It's like an accent, and it's hard to get rid of. And so I sort of feel that some people are in a certain group, but they don't, like, looking from the outside at them, they can't. Everyone seems to have certain blind spots. It's like when you're driving in a car, there's a cyclist in your blind spot. You can't see them because you've got a bit of metal holding your car together, and you can't see that. And so, but other people can. And so I think it's actually good every now and then just to jump out of your denominational vibe and just go somewhere else. Like I'm not saying leave your church or whatever, if it's a good church, but just go and check someone, like listen to someone else, like go and I've listened to James White for years and years and years, and oftentimes people are saying he's a good representation of Calvinism. I know he's not a TR guy, but I do listen to Jeff Riddle, Peter Van Cleeg Senior and Junior. I have lots of good friendships with Calvinists. Anybody saw Ryan, like I saw him, I think it was a year ago in Brisbane, and I did some street preaching up there, and I saw him hanging around, and he's usually really prolific at going out usually 3 or 4 times a week. He's out there preaching, which is great. But he's pretty staunch on the whole Calvinist thing. And so I'm usually not. I'm usually focused on the Bible issues. But anyway, I'm going to move on, and we're going to talk about this video. So less mess, more buff, less Nessman. Okay, I'll shut up. You and me, and it's funny, yesterday, Mike Holness said, "Hey, Nick, you and me said this," and I'm thinking he's saying that we had said something, but he's actually talking about you and me in the chat. So you and me, I got indoctrinated into Calvinism by John MacArthur when I was a babe in Christ. Calvinists prey on the babes in Christ. Yeah, I guess, to me, if they were preaching just exactly what they believed, it would be like, okay, God from eternity has chosen some of you. And I read this in Spurgeon. When I was a new convert, I read through a ton of Spurgeon stuff, even though I wasn't in a Calvinistic church. They recommended Spurgeon. I guess they didn't really know. They're just like, oh, these are preachers from the past, read these guys. And so read a ton of Spurgeon. And in one of his books that I read, he said, whenever you go evangelizing and you've got a crowd of people, tell them that perhaps God has chosen them, sort of from the foundation of the world, chosen them to salvation, and then they need to make that decision. But the other side of the coin of that is maybe God hasn't chosen you. You don't feel compelled. Maybe later you might, but at the moment you probably won't. But also the chances you could have this type of syndrome. Now I'm just going to show you this. Where is it? I don't want to go on about this for too long, but just this one picture sort of sums it up. And I think this is a good thing with the 1 John 5:7 conference. We all come from different backgrounds, so it's not like, oh, we're just all, new IFB fundamentalists. We're defending our thing, and that's just part of being in our group. No, we're all different, and we could all debate on plenty of other things. But yeah, sorry, I can't find that picture, but I'll just explain it. But yeah, I think it's actually a strength that we are all different. What it had in the picture was, how they do a baby reveal and the couple will stand there and blue smoke will come out of some sort of device they've got, or pink smoke will come out, whether it's a boy or a girl. It had black smoke, and it had, the Calvinist reveal, whoops, your kids are reprobate. And that's one of the things. How could you have kids thinking that, say, only 1 in 100 is going to be saved, or even 1 in 20? you could probably give birth to a reprobate and it's going to go to hell. So why not just not have kids? You know, if you're going to populate hell, you're going to love this kid, you know, to death. It's wild. You know, you're going to love this kid, and then it's like, so you just sort of realize at the age of 15, 20, it's like, well, I think that kid's actually just completely reprobate. God hasn't saved them, so there's nothing we can do, sort of thing. But that sort of goes against all the scriptures. And I know people would have excuses for that and talk about that. But anyway, I don't really. Top Priority Ministries has got me on the Calvinist rant. Let's move on. And so if they have the same spirit and are presented the facts and they willingly agree and accept that God in eternity past damned individuals before they existed or did right or wrong, that's a devil. Yeah, and I think people are at different levels of that. Like, I've met people who just don't really understand the whole thing, but everyone else around them is like Calvinist. And I guess it's like all sorts of, you know, I run into people who are, they're writing to Bethel, but that you can tell they're saved and they love God. They just got some weird ideas. And so I'll just try and curb them away from the weird ideas as much as I can without completely offending them and burning a bridge. And so I guess one of the things is I've seen the new IFB guys do this, like especially when it comes to their eschatology. They have a weird eschatology. Okay, it's basically Anderson's ideas, and the new IFB just go, yep, that's it. Now, but how they bring it across is, well, we've got the truth, and they sort of assume that you already know their position. And they mock you from that. It's sort of like, hey, we've got the truth on eschatology. You don't really understand it because you've rejected it. You've rejected the truth. You know better, and you've done the wrong thing by rejecting the truth. And I remember when I started going through their material, and I kept hearing this whole accusation thing, like, we already know this, but we've rejected it. We already know that it's talking about the rapture in Matthew 24 and the second coming at the same time, but we've rejected that position. And I'm like, man, hardly anyone I talk to knows the Anderson position, but they assume that everyone knows this position and they're rejecting it. You know, and I guess that's one thing with a lot of things. We can assume, like even with the Bible issue, that people know what we're talking about. And we've been in this for 10, 20, 30 years talking about these Bible issues. And sometimes we can belittle people and think that they know that this is actually an issue. A lot of people are just really ignorant to a lot of things. And so the whole thing about with Calvinism, like coming to that conclusion, coming to the conclusion that God chooses people for heaven and hell before he made everything. Like that's huge. Like that affects everything. It's wild how people can believe that, but a lot of Calvinists don't understand that. They've never thought that in depth. The reason why I understand those things was because I talked to some people who were really diehard Calvinists, and I used to have like day-long conversations with these guys, and they were trying to convert me to Calvinism, but I just kept saying, well, what about this? And just asking questions. And so they would say they would preach true Calvinism. God from the beginning has chosen people, or he has not chosen people. So even if you fully love God and all the rest of it, you're showing fruit of the Spirit, it's obviously you're a Christian. It's obvious that you're a Christian. They would still say, because you're not a Calvinist, that you're just a false convert. That's how full on they were. So they actually had what I would consider true Calvinism. And so I talked to them. They used to run a Christian bookshop, and in an area when I was just a new Christian, in an area where I worked, if it ever rained, we'd have a day off work, and so I would go to their bookshop, and they kind of loved it. They just wanted to talk and argue and debate. So I'd walk into their shop, and they'd be like, "Ah, oh, good, you're here. Let's debate." And they would have some new thing they're trying to push onto me, and I'd have some new thing I'm trying to push onto them. But we would discuss these things, and it just came down to they taught me that unless I sort of recognize that God has chosen me from eternity to be saved, then I'm damned. So that's the type of Calvinism that I've learned. But what I realize is most people don't go that far. Most people don't even think that hard. They're just like, oh, you know, God's sovereign. You know, it's interesting. I'll try and maybe I should just start the video because I've opened up a can of worms here. I'll finish the comments. Try with Fire says, the thing is, you and me, one has to be indoctrinated into it. How anyone could come to Calvinism just by reading God's word is beyond me. I come from a long line of them, but never took it. Top Priority Ministry says, Spurgeon, Calvinism is the gospel. So I know that that is quoted, but James White actually quoted in context what Spurgeon said. And it is quite a common thing that people would say Calvinism is the gospel. It was taught by Spurgeon. But in the context, James White said it's actually, he's sort of saying, he's not saying that in its pure form in that type of strength. So it seems like a bit of a soundbite. He said he would stop preaching if he knew they weren't elect. It's damnable. What evil could I attribute to God that they haven't already? Yeah, and to me, there's no darkness in God. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. There's no evil. And oftentimes these scriptures, God created evil, this type of thing. Well, evil can just be calamity. You know, like the armies that rose up against Israel. Yes, God created them, but it doesn't mean he created evil, the whole sense of sin and the devil. To me, even the fall in the garden was not part of God's will, because you look at Genesis chapter 6, and God, it says it repented God that he made man. Why would he be repenting of, like, saying I'm changing my mind, I wish I never made man, when it's all part of his plan for his glory? He would say, yeah, this is working exactly how I planned it. They're raping kids, they're killing each other. This is exactly how I want it, you know, and because I planned the fall, you know, so that it does affect. It's like dispensationalism. Like, I'm a dispensationalist. It affects every reading of the Bible because it's a way of studying. So Tulip Calvinism, when you're looking at scriptures through that lens, it affects every verse that you read. All Calvinist kids go to heaven, Nick. Don't you know this? If they get water baptized, because that's the new circumcision. Yes, sorry, let's move on to the topic. Okay, people are saying sorry. That's fine. It's my own. Well, God chose me to be like this, and so I can't help it. Chose you to make that comment. I do. Vody, vipers in diapers. I know many that believe this. You're blind to what these evil people believe and the damage that they have done to many. And we're down to the bottom questions. Why does the Bible matter to the Calvinist? Why does any doctrine or false teaching matter? Nothing matters. They can't even be consistent with that. They're schizophrenic or at best psychopathic. I guess, you know, I wouldn't use those type of harsh terms. I would use the softer terms, just because I know that when people come from that angle, and I guess, you know, a lot of people jump into the reformers, and it's quite interesting because you got Calvin, you got Beza, but one of the students of Beza was Arminius, Jacob Arminius, and the tulip was a response to his writings. So there were quite a lot of people who were following his writings as well, but I don't seem to fit into either one of those camps. But yeah, it is a very interesting thing. And oftentimes, because I really value the point of view of Theodore Beza, but obviously he took over from John Calvin. You know, I actually appreciate a lot of what John Calvin wrote, but I'm not a Calvinist, you know, and even people like Lancelot Andrews, King James translators, a lot of these guys were instrumental in formulating the whole tulip thing. And so it is a very interesting topic, but yeah, I know where I stand on that. But yeah, anyway, let's move on from there. So let's jump into this video. I'll just press play. Rabbit trails have taken us over this morning. So let's start this. Now I'll make sure I'm unmuted. I'll make sure the volume is correct. Here we go. Let's start. And I'll make sure I'm not on 2 speed. No, just normal speed. Here we go.
Wes Huff just destroyed a popular Bible manuscript myth. He sat down with Mikhaila Peterson. Mikhaila Peterson is Dr. Jordan Peterson's daughter. And she, man, this is a good interview. She threw the kitchen sink at him, not in a negative way, just in all of her questions. And the conversation of Bible translations came out, which I guarantee you, look at the comments right now in this video. There's going to be somebody upset about this take for Wes Huff, but I think it's 100% spot on. And I'm so glad that they're having this conversation.
How close are modern Bibles to the original manuscripts? And does it matter which translation you read from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So interestingly enough, one of the points that I make when I often do presentations on this is that as time goes on, we're not getting farther away from the original wording of the Bible. We're actually getting closer to it.
Okay. And this is great because a lot of people from a certain community of the internet say the opposite. Oh, it's getting more diluted and they're changing the Bible. Not true.
Okay, so this is way oversimplified. What's happened is, and this is usually something that the critical text guys don't acknowledge, we've been leaking out manuscripts forever. And so can you imagine like the first 1,000 years of Christianity? We don't have that much information from before the year 1000. Now we do have quite a lot, but not a huge amount. Okay. And so why don't we have a huge amount? Like there would have been thousands and thousands and thousands of manuscripts out there. Well, because these things just get destroyed. You probably had books sitting in a box in your garage, and you open it up, and they're moldy. They've gotten wet or something, or they're just, sometimes you just use something so often it just gets destroyed. Now, things weren't really made to last in the ancient world. They just sort of, unless you use really expensive material, things were on papyrus and things like that. They eventually just became dust. And the more something was used, the more it turned to dust. So obviously the Book of Mormon sitting on my shelf is, all the pages are pristine white pages. You know, I hardly ever open it. And so the thing is, manuscripts that weren't used were usually well preserved. And so this can be a problem because sometimes people in the ancient world understood that a manuscript was corrupt and they just left it there. So my Book of Mormon, if they find that in 1,000 years, it's going to be pristine. But all the other books that I use that have good information, accurate information, they're going to be turned to dust. And so one thing is, in the Reformation, they have a ton of material, a ton of manuscripts that we don't know about today. So like my research into Revelation 16:5, Theodore Beza says that he had an old ancient manuscript of good faith with the reading Esomenos in it. Now, no one seems to know where that is or what that is, and that they don't know anything about it. Okay, so Wes doesn't know anything, James White doesn't know anything. Like, no one knows anything about it. And the thing is, if they actually start talking about Revelation 16:5, they have to deal with what I've said about it for the last 10 years. It's because I'm pushing for a certain view on that, and I'm the one loudly saying stuff about it. So they'd have to learn from me about it, basically, which they don't really want to do. And it's just, let's just sort of remain ignorant on it and say it's a conjectural emendation and just move on. So conjectural emendation is just like a reading made up out of thin air. That's what they usually say. And so, but Theodore Beza, he said he had an old ancient manuscript of good faith. So that was in his 1598 annotation. So just say 1600. So we've got 426 years later. We don't know what manuscript it is. So the thing is, oftentimes what they're dealing with today is extant manuscripts that you can look at, that you can get a photo of, but oftentimes they're not even looking at Beza or Erasmus in their annotations, talking about, hey, we've got this type of reading in this manuscript, but we no longer have that manuscript around. Or if you have something like the Complutensian Polyglot, they used a whole bunch of different manuscripts that Erasmus did, but many times we don't know what they used. And the thing is, I've done many videos on this. The sack of Rome, 1527, Rome was sacked and a lot of manuscripts were destroyed, libraries burnt down, people murdered. There was a whole bunch of things that happened. And the Renaissance period of Rome finished in 1527. We also look at Erasmus. He went to the monasteries in England, and he would have looked at manuscripts that have just been lost in time. In 1539, 1540, Henry VIII, the disillusionment of the monasteries was a huge catastrophe for manuscripts in England. And so, yes, some of them were grabbed and preserved and all the rest of it, but some of them were just destroyed. There were stories of people selling in the markets fish wrapped in an old manuscript. Some of these monasteries were, I guess it's like the Doge thing that Elon Musk was doing. Sometimes they're going through an organization and working out where the money's going. Other times they're just shutting down things, and it becomes like end of World War II, Nazis just burning stuff. It's just chaos. And so that happened in England. And there's like the fall of Constantinople, when the Muslims went into Constantinople with Mehmed. They destroyed tons of things, and a lot of stuff was grabbed by people and went to Europe, and that actually sparked a revival of the Byzantine text and the Textus Receptus, etc. But a lot of things would have just been lost in time, and so this is something that's not usually talked about, because what they want to do is they want to say, okay, what we've got today is sort of like a good representation of what we've always had. So, but the thing is, all you have to do is look at the writings of someone like Beza or someone like Erasmus. They're saying, well, what about this reading? Or even people earlier like Manetti, who did a Latin Bible, which was the first Latin Bible since Jerome to be based upon the Greek. That was 70 years before Erasmus. And many times Erasmus's readings match up with Manetti. And so where are those manuscripts? And so as we go through, you're going to see that basically this is like the spoiler. This is at the end of the day, Wes Huff supports 2 manuscripts. And it doesn't really matter what everything else says. He supports 2 manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. The best example of this is in the Gospel of Mark. The last 12 verses of Mark get deleted by the modern Bibles, ESV, NIV, all the other ones, either deleted in toto, which it's pretty rare for that to happen, but some of them have done that and just said these verses shouldn't be in there. Others have it in brackets and then have a footnote saying, well, these verses shouldn't be in there. But in the apparatus, that Nestle Alarm apparatus, it is double bracketed, which means they are certain that it shouldn't be in there. Now, James White will say they're Gnostic. Those verses are Gnostic. So isn't it amazing that you're carrying your ESV around and you've got Gnostic readings in there? But Peter Gurry, he says that they're apocryphal. So you got part of the Apocrypha in there. It's just so strange, where we believe that they are genuine readings. Now, only 2 manuscripts omit those 12 verses, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Now, we're going to talk about them as we go. But Vaticanus and Sinaiticus don't have those 12, so they take them out. 1,653 manuscripts have the last 12 verses. So we're looking at 99.99% of all the evidence have in favor of our reading. Only 2 don't. And so Wes can say whatever he wants about all manuscripts and all the rest of it. When Westcott and Hort did what they did, they threw out the majority of manuscripts and only focused on 2, mostly, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. They grabbed a few others here and there that were also just as weird, and they went with some of their readings. But mostly the Byzantine text was thrown out. The Byzantine text is basically just like the text. That's the main text everywhere. Okay, these other weirdo ones, they call them Alexandrian texts sometimes, but they shouldn't even be classified as their own same group. They're so different. It's sort of like if you had a whole bunch of cows, just say you're breeding cows, and they had deformities. One has a leg hanging out here. It's got 5 legs. It's obviously deformed. One has like a cleft palate. It's looking really weird. The other one has only one horn. These are like these manuscripts: Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, and some of them are only half weird. Some of them are fully weird, but they are aberrations when you compare it to the rest of what we have. And so they go with these weirdo manuscripts. They want to breed them together and create offspring from that. And that's where the modern Bibles come from the weird manuscripts. From Vaticanus was rejected. It was known about by Erasmus, by the Reformers, by John Mills, 1707. He knew about it. They all said it was weird. They said it's probably a back translation from a Latin document. It's not a genuine text. It has bizarre and strange and weird readings in it. But then Codex Sinaiticus was found in 1844, and that was just as weird. And so they just got these two and said, these are the best. And they classify them as Alexandrian, but there's so many differences between them. And so when you look at Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, just in the Gospels alone, there's 3,000 differences. And if Hermann Hoskier, who came up with that number, if he had gone through the other 17 types of tabulation that he used on other manuscripts, there would have been tens of thousands of differences that would have been pointed out. But he only just had a sort of cursory look through it and found 3,000 differences. And so obviously one's Danny DeVito, one's Arnold Schwarzenegger, but they're called twins. It's like, these are the best, And so they squish these two together to form a never seen before text. So that's the Westcott and Hort text. Now, Westcott and Hort text is the main foundation for everything that came after that. So we follow the Textus Receptus, which was compiled by the Reformers, Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, and then the King James guys. And that has been accepted as the received text. There was no other text that you could really go with. Their text didn't exist for like 1,500 years, or according to their history, I don't think it's ever really existed. Because you don't see copies of Vaticanus. You don't see translations of Vaticanus or Sinaiticus. They're just standalone weird things, mutants. But they get these mutants and they squish them together, and now the offspring is the Nestle Alarm group, the United Bible Society text. So these texts are said that they're the best, but they're sort of like these genetically modified weird texts that just have never been in existence. And when you know that type of history, that our text is based upon the vast majority, 99% of all the manuscripts back up what we're saying, where when you go to the critical text, it's a very small percentage. And usually it's just 2 manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, but they put greater weight on these manuscripts. So it's like, well, they're the most important ones. These manuscripts are the best. They're the most important ones. And so they override everything else. These are the gold standard. But when you actually read them, they're filled with just bizarre, weird, strange Gnostic readings. And so obviously what we think that is a critical text methodology just to get rid of our proper text, the Byzantine type text.
Why?
Okay.
So though as time chronologically goes on, I would argue that because of the evidence that we've actually had the privilege to be available to us, mainly the manuscripts, although not limited to it, we are able to track and trace the chain of custody back to the original wording more accurately. So the way I often word this is if you compare, say, a modern translation of the Bible to something like the King James Bible.
Yeah.
So the King James Bible is translated between 1604 and 1611. It's translated not.
Okay, so just before he goes into the King James Bible issue, notice that he feels that he has to demonize the King James. When he's asked questions about this, he usually throws the King James under the bus, and he demonizes it. And it's quite amazing that he does this. He did this on the Cultish program, which is strange because basically if you have the same position that, say, people 200 years ago had, where they believe the King James is the word of God and it's a perfect representation of the Greek and Hebrew texts, if you have that position today, you're in a cult. Where 200 years ago, you could be a missionary in India or Africa, and you were seen as like a hero. You know, that they talk about them as if they're on their side. But today, people like them are on the outer. We're in a cult now, and they're the Orthodox people, which it's so strange because it's more like a Jehovah's Witness type of concept where the truth vanished and faded away. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. They had the correct teachings in the beginning, but then it all faded away. And then in the latter days, late, I think it was like 1840s, the type of, Seventh-day Adventist movement started. And then there was sort of like a breakaway, became the Jehovah's Witnesses. But that type of movement vanished for like 1800 years, 1500 years sort of thing. And now we've got the truth. And so that they believe that for their Bible. The Bible, I'm like, where was your Bible in the Reformation? It's like, well, Vaticanus was in a library in the Vatican. It's like, well, just what, one manuscript? Well, what about everything else? Because everything else comes against Vaticanus. Everything else comes against Sinaiticus. Yes, there are a few weird readings here and there, but the vast majority, 99% of everything, backs up the Byzantine text, which is backing up the King James. And so he's like, well, we've found all this other stuff today. Yes, that is true. But what is that other stuff? And are they actually utilizing that? Well, we'll find out later they aren't. They're going with two manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So this guy who's doing this video, I'm not sure if he knows much about this. He just seems to hate King James people. And I understand some King James people are King James ugly. They've got some weird concepts. They're obnoxious jerks. But that doesn't mean you throw the truth out. Okay.
From handwritten manuscripts as much as it's translated from printed editions of the Greek New Testament and Hebrew Old Testament.
Okay. There's a group, KJV only, 1611, or you're not going to heaven.
So notice he misrepresents people who would have a difference of opinion. And so, 1611 or you're not going to heaven. I don't know anyone who says if you don't read the 1611, you're not saved. I know, like Will Kenny, he oftentimes gets accused of that. And he's like, well, no, I think you're saved if you read an NIV, ESV, whatever. I know lots of Christians who haven't come on board with this concept of the Textus Receptus or King James yet. I'm hoping they will. But oftentimes it's just this simplistic, pigeonholing. Oh, you're a weirdo. You believe that you're not saved if you don't read the King James. This type of thing. So they go to an extreme. Now there might be some weirdos here and there on the internet that say that sort of stuff, but I'm definitely not one of them. And I don't like. I run sites that we're talking about this issue all the time, and it's very rare to get people who just say, well, you're not saved if you're reading an NIV or an ESV or whatever. And when you listen to Wilkiny, he got saved. They'll share their testimony. I got saved at this time, at this place. But for 10 years, I read the NIV. Most people will have that type of thing. But then it was an issue of truth, and they came down to, why is this verse deleted? Or what about this other Bible version? And then they came to truth. So the whole, KJV, or you're not saved type of thing it's just to paint everyone with that brush when there's probably like 1%, less than 1% of King James people believe that type of thing. It's just a slander. And so, so just before he starts going onto the KJV issue, I just want to talk about a few things that have happened. And so people online, oftentimes they're saying we have more manuscripts now. We've got more manuscripts. Therefore, we're closer to the original Bible. Okay. But what they don't say is Westcott and Hort wanted to not focus on 99.99% of all manuscripts. They just wanted to focus on Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So their argument is like, oh, we've got all these manuscripts now, but they don't use them. that all of those manuscripts that they're looking at today, except for like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and a small little spattering of readings in papyri and other things, that they ignore everything else. And so, the 5,000, plus, just say it's 5,500. I know Myths and Mistakes will say 5,200. Then someone will come out and say it's 5,800. So just say 5,500 manuscripts. Well, the vast majority of them are ignored by these people. Now, they might put them in the apparatus of the 28th edition, Nestle edition. It might be an M for majority text or a BYZ for Byzantine, but they get ignored. And so now with the CBGM, there's a tiny little, sprinkle of salt of Byzantine readings every now and then just getting put in. I think that's to appease some people who have jumped into that camp. But the vast majority of all these Bible versions are based upon the Westcott and Hort text, or all these Greek texts, sorry. Like the Nestle Aland editions are based upon Westcott and Hort texts. When Metzger was asked their methodology, they said, or Metzger said that they went back to the Westcott and Hort and they used their readings and they only amended it according to other evidence. And so they went back to the Westcott and Hort foundation, where originally Nestle's text was Westcott and Hort, the Weymouth, and then the Weiss, and also the Tischendorf. And they dropped, I think it was the Weiss text or the Weymouth. I always get them mixed up. But then they just had these three. And so wherever they agreed, that was the main text. Wherever they disagreed was the marginal notes. But what's happened is now they have all this information in the footnotes of the Greek apparatus. And so it gives this air of like, well, we looked at those readings. We've examined these readings, but they haven't. They've just gone with Westcott and Hort. They have, Westcott and Hort would have hated all these footnotes because they weren't going to go with them. They don't want to know what the Byzantine text says. They were throwing the Byzantine text in the bin. So it's like getting readings that they've thrown out and putting them in the bottom there. And these people don't care about those readings really anyway. Now, the CBGM is like this different thing that's come along just in the last, 10 years. But some of these readings, the CBGM is spitting out that they are rejected even by critical text guys. And so, Wes Huff, he's making these claims, and it sounds really convincing. We've got more discoveries. We've got more manuscripts. There's more archaeology. There's more science. This sounds so great, but if you look at this type of material as if these guys are sort of like the misinformation that came around during COVID time. There's trust the science. We're the scientists. We're the guys who give you the good oil. We are the guys working with the lab coats and our beakers, and we're just doing science here, and we're coming up with these better discoveries. It's like an iPhone. Of course, it's going to get better and better as time goes along. That's what we're doing. We're just doing neutral things. This is like technology advancing. Of course, we're going to come up with better things. But when you look at it, they're not actually examining all of this stuff. They're not. They might put it in their apparatus, but they have zero intention of actually weighing it up and thinking that it could be a genuine reading. Zero. They couldn't care less about it. It's almost like, well, they're all that's all the stuff that we reject and we think is stupid. Where they're making out that is as if they've looked at it all. But the thing is, it's pretty much the same text as Westcott and Hort had. And they only just worked on 2 manuscripts. So they still have that type of understanding that basically the Byzantine is just silly. So naturally people will think, well, obviously modern scholars must know the original better today than Christians in 1611. And so that's what gets brought across, where it's simply not true, because they don't talk about what was lost and what the people like Beza and Erasmus and Stephanus, what they talked about, the Complutensian guys, all the things that they talked about, where is every one of those manuscripts? Well, they're just lost in history. Dan Wallace said in World War II, we lost 1 million biblical documents just in World War II alone. And so 1 million. So there's lots of biblical, there's coins, there's vases, there's archaeology, there's manuscripts, there's a whole bunch of stuff that can prove writings in scripture. And throughout history, there's been wars, there's been disasters, there's been tsunamis, there's been floods, there's been natural catastrophes, earthquakes that have destroyed manuscripts. So sometimes we have to trust, when we're reading the apparatus of someone like Theodore Beza and he said he had an old ancient manuscript, we have to trust that that's true, because we don't have that with us today, where people in the academy are like, oh no, well, he was probably drunk, or maybe he was just like a Joe Biden sort of guy and he just forgot. And this is the sort of stuff we run up against. They just demonize people in the past. And it's a very hyper skeptical movement. And basically the bibliology that Wes Huff is promoting is identical to what the Jehovah's Witnesses would say to me. And they have exactly the same text. Now, the Jehovah's Witnesses mightn't go with the NA 28th edition. I'm not sure about that, but they do go with the Westcott and Hort edition when they have made their New World Translation. And so oftentimes you'll look for a deleted verse. It's in the King James, but it's not in the New World Translation. You'll go to the ESV and it's also not in the ESV. So from my perspective, they are actually defending like the Jehovah's Witness position. And I remember, as a new convert, I had about 100 visits from the Jehovah's Witnesses to our house. And we would often talk about, textual criticism, which Bible says what and all the rest of it. And I had no idea that these modern Bibles, NASB, NIV and others, had all the same mistakes in it. Not exactly. Now, some things are mistranslated, of course, by the Jehovah's Witnesses, but when it came down to the underlying text, there were verses missing. And I couldn't understand why Christians would gravitate towards these new things when they were just sort of matching themselves up with the Jehovah's Witness Bible. It was like, how can you prove the Trinity from the NIV when half of these verses aren't there, So we're slowing this conversation down. And once you see it, the entire debate changes. So that they're trying to make out that this is, conspiracy theory. This is just an emotional rant, or it's just King James people who don't even think you're saved, sort of thing. But we just want to carefully examine the logic behind this modern manuscript argument, because it's not simply how many manuscripts do we have, because they don't use them. They use Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, and only one of those, 1844, is like a modern day discovery, but it's so poorly done. But they just have labeled it as very old. So this is another thing, the dating game. When it comes to dating manuscripts, these things need to be scientifically tested, either with XRF technology, going through the inks, finding out what chemical makeup is in the ink. You can do that very easily nowadays. But they won't do that. They won't date them exactly. That should be the first thing they do. Is like, okay, we've got this new technology. Let's line up. Let's date these so we can prove to the world that they're this old. I think they realize that they're not as old as they're claiming. And so that's the thing. If they lose their old status, then people go, well, if these are like, like if Vaticanus proves to be like 14th century or something like that, and Sinaiticus proves to be a modern day forgery, or, written in 1840 by Simonides, as some people have talked about, if that is proven, then all of a sudden their whole Bible industrial complex is based upon these two manuscripts falls. So that's, to me, that's why they're not testing them. I would test everything. And we know there's scams. People who understand evolution, they know that the dating game is very important for them. To have a bone that's, 12,000 years old, it's for that to be dated in a certain way, or to be guesstimated to be that old because it's found in a certain strata of rock or whatever, that's very important to them. And so in the Bible dating game, you'll find Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, they want to have that as like 350, 360, because older to them means best. It's closer to the original. But think about the logic of that. Vaticanus and Sinaiticus differ so much. Why would they be so different when they're so old? And why then would they have such a massive difference from everything else? And so Westcott and Hort came up with this Lucianic recension that Lucian basically, during that time, there was a purge of all the really good manuscripts. And we're just left with this horrible Byzantine text. But hardly anyone believes that today. But they have another type of Lucianic recension, which is called Islam. They say, well, Islam went around just destroying all the good texts. And the Byzantine text just kept growing and growing, and that eventually took over. But there's really not much proof of that. Now, obviously, some people over time have destroyed things. I mean, the Roman Catholics used to burn a lot of manuscripts and a lot of Bibles and all sorts of things. But then they were involved with making manuscripts and printing Bibles. And so it's not just a one size fits all sort of thing. But the real issue is what has been used by there's really no proof that Vaticanus or Sinaiticus was really ever used by church people. Okay, the Byzantine text was used everywhere. Byzantine readings are in the Latin text, because when you look at, say, the Roman Catholic Church, they used the Latin, and after the Reformation happened, they pronounced that we are going to go with the Latin text. And when you look at the Latin text, say the 1592 Clementine Vulgate, you look at that and compare that to, say, Theodore Beza. I mean, there are differences, but it's not huge like what we see today in the critical text. So the Latin and the Greek aren't that different. Okay, yes, there are differences, but you'll still see the woman caught in adultery there. You'll still see the last 12 verses of Mark there. You'll see the Comiohenium there. And so the issue really comes down to this new text is way different to what anyone has ever seen in history. And it's based upon clumsy manuscripts that have provenance that people have questioned. Erasmus said it's probably a back translation from a Latin document. Now, he knew manuscripts very well. Being raised as a scribe, he used to copy Latin manuscripts. That's why he became so proficient in Latin. He was probably the world-leading expert in Greek at the time in Europe. And so he knew his manuscripts, and he knew about Vaticanus, and he said it's a back translation from a Latin document. And he sort of suggested it was made at the Council of Florence, which was only like, I think it was 1349. It wasn't that long before, sort of like, a couple of hundred years earlier. Or was it 100 years earlier? Anyway, he was saying it's a modern day thing. And so he didn't like Vaticanus. John Mill sort of said the same thing about it in 1707. These things have been corrupted. Dean Burgon, he looked at Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, and he said they are hopelessly corrupt manuscripts. But now they're the best. So what has been at the bottom of the barrel is now at the top of the pile, and people who are Unitarians, who don't believe in the Trinity, don't believe in the deity of Christ, like George Van Smith and others, they have helped Westcott and Hort, people like Weiss and people like Ezra Abbott and a whole bunch of other people who are Unitarians, don't believe in the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit being Jehovah God. They don't believe that Jesus is God. They don't believe that Holy Spirit is a person. Oftentimes it's these guys who have influenced Westcott and Hort and influenced other people to delete Trinitarian verses, to change and morph things, to get rid of the Trinity, which is quite amazing. Now, they haven't completely gotten rid of it. I mean, you can't even get rid of it out of the New World Translation. It's still there. But they have a strong attempt at getting rid of that. And so these people have come up out of the woodwork, and they've got their new Bible. And people like Wes Huff and others are defending this mess and just saying this is the best. And one of the reasons they'll say it's the best is because, well, King James is hard to read, or King James didn't have enough manuscript. The King James translators didn't have enough manuscripts, or the manuscripts that they had, it was good for them at the time, but we have so much more today. But they don't even use what's available today. And there's so much more they're talking about actually backs up the King James. Like 99.99% of them are Byzantine manuscripts that back up the King James. And so, okay, so let's just continue.
There's a spectrum there, but there are people that believe the KJV, that is the inspired one. If you have anything inside the KJV, bad. And this myth has taken on popularity within recent years of this idea that the KJV is the only translation. I mean, even acquaintances of mine, like Johnny Chang, tends to be a KJV only type of person, even though I don't think Johnny would be all the way out there with, hey, if you're reading the NIV or the ESV, you're not, Christian, but would probably say, hey, this is not the best translation, which I just think is false because of what Wes Huff is going to lay out for us next.
Okay.
So he's going through the whole, King James, Johnny Chang. Yeah, I did a video about Johnny Chang recently, showing what he believed, and just in that one video, I don't know much about the guy. Seems like a nice sort of guy, doing prison ministries and all sorts of things, and I take my hat off to that. But he, people are saying, oh, he's a King James guy and he's wrong here and wrong there. And so I just went through and just said, no, he's not wrong here, and here. He's actually correct. Now, I'm not defending him in any way. He could turn around tomorrow and I could find out he doesn't believe certain things that I believe. I have no idea really what he believes. But it does seem like these guys are like, wow, even our friend is in a cult, sort of thing. So it just comes down to, the data doesn't support that the King James Version is a superior translation. So that's sort of, that's pretty much what he's saying. And so let me just say this from the outset. I'm not attacking Wes Huff personally, okay? He's an intelligent guy. He's well-spoken. He's knowledgeable. But he is wrong. Now, I run into Jehovah's Witnesses who are very intelligent, smart people. They believe in young earth creationism. They believe God made everything. They believe in an end time scenario. They're smart people. But they are wrong on a lot of what they talk about. And so intelligent people can still make assumptions that we have to scrutinize. And so the biggest assumption that Wes makes here is that there's more manuscripts, therefore we have a more accurate text today. And so, it sounds like just a conclusion, 1 + 1 = 2, we've got more manuscripts. The thing is, the level of scholarship has dropped. The level of scholarship in 1611 is astronomical. Like the ability for those people to read Latin, to read Greek, to read Hebrew, to understand Arabic, to look at these languages and to know about them and to be thinking about them. Like what we have today in scholarship is quite poor. And this has been stated quite a lot. Like even someone in the academy who's a very influential person, Bart Ehrman, he says, look, when you look at the 1611 guys, they could do sermons in Greek, in Latin. They could talk to each other in Hebrew, this type of thing. And obviously they're not, just conversational Hebrew, but it's like they could explain things in the Old Testament, reading through the Hebrew. And Bart Ehrman said, look, people in the academy are just sloshing through with a dictionary and And the thing is, too, a lot of these dictionaries have been marred by the influence of Unitarianism. So Jehovah's Witnesses love it when they're at your door saying something and you go to the Strong's Concordance, because oftentimes Strong's will have a Unitarian type of bent with some of the explanations. Some of the explanations of Vines, because Vines will often say the Revised Version says this. You'll go through it and it will sort of favor a Jehovah's Witness type of point of view, because Unitarian influence is all over those dictionaries. So you've got to be careful what dictionaries you're going to as well. And so we're going back levels of thinking that undergird and underlie translations as well. Because oftentimes if someone brings out a translation, an ESV or something, they've got like the ESV study guide or interlinear or parallel dictionary, and they will morph their definitions to match the translation. But that's what they're doing sometimes. And so I know the Jehovah's Witnesses, they used to have their Kingdom Interlinear translation, their Greek, and you go through John 1:1, and it would actually say in the interlinear that it should read the way that traditional Protestants have had it, with the word was God. And so they sort of, it was strange. They didn't match everything up. I guess they probably do now. But what they have in a lot of these Bibles, when Westcott and Hort did their thing, other concordances and dictionaries and lexicons came out saying, well, this is what it really means. And so oftentimes that's why they want you to get Logos Bible software and get the latest BDAG thing. They want you to go through the latest Mounts material, because these definitions will help their cause. Where if you go older, you go to the Reformation dictionaries and lexicons and concordances, that they're different. And so that's why we oftentimes are saying just go back to the old sources. They're way better. Okay, so let's let Wes talk.
There's a printed edition of the Blomberg Hebrew text. And then there are these 7 printed editions of the Greek New Testament. 5 by a guy named Desiderius Erasmus, who was this great Dutch scholar in the Middle Ages. And then updates by a guy named Stephanus and a guy named Beza. And that kind of sits like as the center, the base for what the King James translators are primarily using.
What that means is when they translated the King James, they did not translate it from the earliest manuscripts. They translated it from a printed version. Okay, that's important. Why? Because he's going to explain to us that as time goes on, there were other manuscripts that were discovered later on to help us get a closer picture of what was in the original language. Okay,
so probably the only manuscript that would be relative to that would be Sinaiticus, discovered in 1844 by Constantine von Tischendorf. There is a big question mark over it as to its age. A guy called Simonides came out and said that he wrote it in 1840. But when it comes to that issue, Wes is sort of saying, okay, well, the King James guys really only used printed texts. And this is something that James White says as well. And oftentimes I'm there scratching my head saying, why would they say that? Why would they use that as an argument? Because the King James translators, they actually did their own text. Okay. Now, they utilized Theodore Beza's material. They utilized Stephanus's, they utilized Erasmus's, they utilized everything. And when you understand this, it changes your idea of what the King James is. So the King James isn't just a Bible translation. It is actually a compilation of everything, of all the biblical knowledge. If you could put it in a funnel and it was poured out somewhere, it went to that era of 1604, 1611. And the people who were working on the King James, like people like Henry Saville, people like Lancelot Andrews, people like Andrew Downes, if you look at that's just a handful of these people. If you look at the 60 translators, they were next level scholars who knew their stuff. They went through all the English editions They went through all the Spanish editions, all the Italian editions. They went through all the French editions. So they went through everything. And then they utilized the best text of the day was Beza's 1598. They utilized that. Now, they only departed from that in probably about 20 places. Now, when they departed from that, they had to do their own textual criticism. Now, these people were already well versed in manuscripts. Now, these, like, say someone like Henry Saville, he went around Europe. He collected 15,000 manuscript sheets of the works of Chrysostom, like 15,000 manuscript sheets. So he was going from university to library to manuscript collectors, private collectors, and he was gathering together the biggest collection of the works of Chrysostom, who lived around, he died in about the year 400, and he's doing that in all of these places around Europe. And a lot of these other guys were doing the same thing. A lot of these guys were contemporary with Theodore Beza. Oftentimes, some of the King James translators would go over and do debates that were hosted by Theodore Beza. And so obviously this is before the King James, but these guys have a huge history as well. So that these were people who were already very active in the textual world. I say someone like John Boyce. John Boyce, he knew Hebrew at the age of 5. He was taught by his father. At the age of 6, he could write Hebrew. And by the age of 13, he was in Oxford and studying Greek. And so these guys were brilliant at what they were doing. And he left 30,000 30,000 pages of Greek in a personal diary. How many people keep a diary? How many people would write 30,000 pages worth of diary? How many people would write it all in Greek? So these guys were next level. Henry Saville, he taught the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth. So he was teaching her for years and years Greek language. So he's the one who collected the 15,000 manuscript sheets of Chrysostom. What you think that he wasn't looking at other manuscripts while he was in a library somewhere? And so that's only just a smattering of the type of skill, the type of ability that these guys had. These guys were just walking libraries. They were brilliant guys, and no one questions that. The only people who I find question that are people on the critical text side who have a barrow to push. Historians, secular people, they take their hat off to Erasmus and say, brilliant guy. Stephanus, amazing job. Theodore Beza, wow, that's incredible what he did. King James guys, they're like, man, this is next level. This is incredible what these guys did. But it's only really critical text guys who go, oh, they didn't have enough manuscripts. And some of them will say that the King James translators were sort of like, oh, they're good in Latin, but not in Greek. And they didn't know the Granville-Sharp rule. And they say all this sort of dumb stuff. Which has been completely debunked. And Wes has said that too, because he's just repeating stuff that James White says, which is just, it's not really scholarly. It's just sort of anti-King James rhetoric. But anyway, let's continue. I'll just go for a little bit further, then I'll catch up on the comments.
Okay.
The main texts that are being used are the editions of Erasmus. Those are primarily built on 31 approximate manuscripts that go back.
Okay, so usually Dan Wallace says the King James is based on 5 manuscripts. James White will say, well, it's based upon, Erasmus based his text upon 6 to 12 manuscripts. He used to say 6. Then when there was pushback, he's like, oh, between 6 and 12. Then when there's a lot of pushback, he says, well, maybe 20. It's like, okay, so you don't know, do you? You've just doubled it and nearly tripled it. Well, you have tripled it and added another few. Stephen Boyce, I think he said between 7 and 10. Yeah, so it's like 5 or 6, and then it's 6 and 12, and then it's 20. And here's Wes Huff saying the King James is mostly based on Erasmus. So that's the first 5 editions. Now, he did say there's 7 manuscripts. There's Erasmus's 5 editions, then Stephanus, then Beza. There's actually Erasmus's 5 editions. Then we have a whole bunch of independent editions done outside of Erasmus. So there's also the Aldine edition. There's also Wolf. Maybe I can quickly I'm going to get my website up, but I did announce that it was down because of the cPanel issue, so I can't go there. But there's Sessa 1538. I'm just trying to remember them. And Stephanus has 4 editions. So he's 1546, 1549, 1550, 1551. So he has 4 editions. Theodore Beza has 5 editions. The first one was annotations on the Greek, but he actually has it all in Latin. So he doesn't have the Greek text there, but he has annotations on the Greek text, which is interesting. But that's his first edition. That's in 1556. Then in 1565, he has the Greek there and his annotations. So it's 1556 and 1582, 1589, and then 1598. So he has this 5 editions and a whole bunch of other smaller editions and things like that. And in between then, you have like the Plantin Polyglot. They rehash the Complutensian Polyglot. Complutensian Polyglot, 1514. Plantin's Polyglot, they rehashed that in 1572. So there's a whole bunch of Greek stuff happening in Europe for like 100 years. And so they are writing dictionaries, lexicons. They're doing a whole bunch of studies into these words. And at the same time, there's all sorts of translation work happening. Geneva Bible, the Bishop's Bible. You've got French Geneva Bible done by Theodore Beza. You've got teams of people working on Bibles. You've got knowledge is exploding in this time. There are people who are fluent in Hebrew, like Tremelius, who's a Jewish guy, working with Theodore Beza, working with Eunice, who is the nephew of Tremelius, I'm pretty sure. Yes. And he reads Arabic fluently. So you've got all these types of things coming together. And the King James guys looked at everything. They examined everything. So let me just prove this. Dedication to King James. Okay. I'll just put this up. Introductory dedication to King James. I'm just going to read one little section here. So in the original King James, this is what used to appear. And it says here, for when your highness had once out of deep judgment apprehended how convenient it was that one out of the original sacred tongues, the Hebrew and Greek, 2, together with the comparing of the labors both of our own, that's English Bibles, and 3, and other foreign languages of many worthy men who went before us, there should be one more exact translation of the Holy Scriptures into English, into the English tongue. So they had 3 sources, okay? So the original sacred tongues was the primary source, the original Hebrew, the original Greek. So when people say, oh, it's just a revision from the Bishop's Bible, no, that's ridiculous. Now, they did have that as their draft. Why would you reinvent the wheel when you've already got a very good draft in the Bishop's Bible? And so, but that was to look at English words that are chosen. Okay, when you're looking at the text, they were to go to the original sacred tongues, and anything that was mistranslated or anything that didn't match up, they were to override the bishops with the original. So anything that overrides the bishops is obviously superior to the bishops. So the original sacred tongues had primacy. So they compared it with they looked at the Tyndale, they looked at the Coverdale, they looked at the Matthews, the Tabernacle Bible, the Geneva Bible, Bishop's Bible. They looked at every English edition. The Wycliffe Bible, they would have looked at old Anglo-Saxon Bibles, going back 500 years before them. They were to look at all that. They were to look at all the labors that were in French, and they say this there is a preface in the King James. This is dedication to the king. Now the translators to the reader goes more in depth, but it says that they were going through the Dutch, the French, the every other language. and they were examining all these as well. So the King James isn't just a translation; it's the funnel of everything that happened in the Reformation in Europe. It comes down to these guys knowing this stuff, these guys being able to decipher what by going through all the French Bibles, by going through all the Spanish Bibles, by going like they had Spanish people in the King James translation project, like Hadrian Savara, he was a Spanish guy. Lancelot Andrews spoke 21 languages. He spoke 15 modern European languages, and he spoke six ancient languages. And so you've got guys like that, they're polyglots, they're given over to this material, and they are seen by the other scholars as legends. But these guys are legendary themselves. And so we're looking at a time when this is the Renaissance movement happening, and it's in England. Obviously Shakespeare, there's a whole bunch of, like, not only is there study into the original languages, into other languages, but also English is blossoming and booming. So all of this is happening at the same time. Anyway, a lot of people don't realize that they just think, oh, the King James is just a translation. No, it's way more than just a translation. They examined everything. And so that's why the Bible societies, who Wes's dad works for the United Bible Societies, they've changed since Wes got Hort. But the Bible societies used to use the Textus Receptus, started in 1804. They used to use the Textus Receptus. They used to say, we want to make Bibles like the King James, but in French, but in German, but in other languages. So like someone like Chris Yetzer, he's got information about the Italian Bible, because he's in Italy and he's a King James guy. And he's got information about the Italian Bible from the Bible Society, saying they need to match their edition up to the King James readings here, and here. And so that's what they were doing. So then when Westcott and Hort came along, they overtook the Bible Societies. They overtook everything. The Nestle text was the one that was used to overthrow the Textus Receptus. And now all these foreign Bibles have, if they're following the Nestle Aland 28th edition, it has 2,900 less Greek words. That's the underlying text. And it has 8,000 changes in Greek as well. So that's a lot. And so these Bibles are based upon a mess. And so obviously if you get the ESV, it can be, you can get something that's translated amazingly, but if it's lacking 2,900 Greek words and it's got 8,000 changes, it's obviously a different text. That's a lot of words. And so that's what we're saying. There's so much change here that, like, people get their knickers in a knot. The critical text guys get their knickers in a knot over just one word missing or one word changed, okay? So say the Wicked Bible, where it says, thou shalt commit adultery. It was a King James edition. Now, as soon as they found out there was a print error, they destroyed most of them. I think there's a couple left, and they're worth a fortune. But they weren't saying, oh, this is fine. You know, they were saying, no, this is terrible. Let's destroy it. But see, these guys, they actually mock us and say, oh, you guys had the Wicked Bible and the King James. And it's like, yeah, well, it wasn't used. It was just an aberration. But that's just one word change. I mean, they go on about the Jehovah's Witnesses. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. And they're like, see, the Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult. They put a there. But they've got 2,900 less Greek words than the traditional text that the Reformers used, that that follows the King James, that the Bible Society's used for 100 years. And they've got 8,000 changes. So while they physically shudder about, Wicked Bible, and physically shudder about, a God, they've got so much added and subtracted information in their Bibles that it's like it makes my head spin around and green vomit come out, that they have so much difference. And so anyway, I'm going to catch up with some of these comments. Maybe I should put the comments on so people can see them. Here we go. Show comments. There we go. Now I'll zoom back down to where I was. Now, there are so many comments that I think if I was to actually read through these, I would be here just for an hour. So I know that some people do expect me to read through them all, but there is a lot of commentary here. And I guess as the channel grows and we become more popular, which is what's happening, it's going to be hard to do stuff. So maybe what I can do is I'll just continue through, because I've already gone for nearly 2 hours, or else I'll be here forever. And we'll just continue on with this. And yeah, so sorry if you guys are expecting me to read through that. It's just one of those things where I can get caught up. But the thing is too, sometimes really good information comes out of people talking about stuff in the chat. So I guess what I can do is, I can't promise anything. I'm limited with time, but it would be great if I could go through and just read all this, but I'm going to run out of time, I think. And we're not even halfway through this video. So let's just continue.
Back to approximately the 11th century. So there's a bit of a blurriness to that. Erasmus consulted an individual named Bombasius in Rome to check a manuscript that existed in the Vatican known as Codex Vaticanus, which is actually from the 4th century. But if we skip ahead, like 2026 today.
Well, he contacted Bombasius, he contacted Sepuldiva, and got 365 readings of Vaticanus and rejected them.
We're not only aware of those 31 approximate manuscripts that the King James translation's base text was relied on.
So he's saying, so this is where the numbers game, it's like a shell game. They're like, here's the dollars underneath this cup, and then they shift it around. It's like, oh no, it's over here now. So at first it's like, well, Erasmus based his text on 5 manuscripts. Then James White 6 and 12, then 20. Stephen Boyce 7 and 10, I think it is. And then he was saying Erasmus like 30, but now he's saying King James 31 or whatever. And it's like, okay. So I know Theodore Beza himself said that he had access, I think it was to 24 manuscripts. So he had access to 5th century Codex Beza, which is named after him. Now, he said it wasn't the best document, but he still had access to 5th century stuff. Erasmus had access to Vaticanus. And what they do is they make out Erasmus never saw Vaticanus. Because, I guess when he visited the Vatican Library, he slipped on a banana peel and hit his head, I guess. Like, this is just their story. And they won't budge from that, because it's like if he saw Vaticanus, then he looked at it and said it's a piece of trash. Like most people who have looked at it and gone, this is rubbish. And so what he knew about it, he said it's a back translation from a Latin document. He wasn't happy with it. And so, but so then you've got, Stephanus, he said he had access to like 16 manuscripts. No one knows how many manuscripts Erasmus had access to. And so they keep throwing numbers out. Like, I would love for someone who's listening to this, who's a critical text guy, to just give me a list. And people just go, oh, Wikipedia, it's like, no, give me a definitive list that 100% what Erasmus used. And he's not even talking about Complutense and Polyglot guys who basically had access to everything in the Vatican Library, and also everything that was in Spain at the time. And so they were able to access that. They had a ton of manuscripts that they used, and they noticed they didn't use Vaticanus. They thought it was trash as well, or else they would have used it. And so these numbers are 31. Where's he coming up with this 31 number? How many manuscripts does the Complutense and Polyglot use? Like, just say that I'm just giving, reasonable estimates. Like, just say they use 10 manuscripts. Okay, I'd say they use way more than that, but just say they use 10, and just say Erasmus. James White said 20, but we'll just say 10. Just to keep the numbers down. There's 20 already. We know that Stephanus used 16, so there's 36. We know that Beza used, 24 or 21, so we'll just say 20. Okay, so we're already looking at 56 just on a cursory look, let alone what the King James guys had access to as well. And so the numbers are just out. And this is the thing. These guys say these numbers. They're popular apologists. They say these numbers get swirled around. People repeat them. And it's like, where did this number come from? And it's the parrot syndrome. They just parrot someone else. So Wes Huff is obviously getting his material from someone. Now, maybe someone even went through some of my earlier videos critiquing Wes Huff, and they've gone through the information and gone, yeah, Nick's saying, what about this manuscript? What about this edition? What about the Complutensian? What about Stephanus? What about this and that? And so he's gone, well, 31, you know. So he's jumped from, you know, the King James being based upon 6 manuscripts sort of thing to now it's 31, but it's still out. It's like, so it's just guesswork. And he's better off saying, look, between, like saying 31. Like, it's like me guessing what age, you know, Wes Huff grew a goatee or something. It's like, well, he was 24 and in April. It's like, well, I don't know that. I'm just having a stab in the dark. I don't know even if he had a beard or anything, you know, but that's what he's doing with the manuscripts. He's just throwing out a number. And that's what makes them sound so legitimate, because they've got this guesswork game happening, and they're just throwing it's not like between, you know, say, you know, 30 and 50 manuscript. No, it's definitely 31. That's the science has proven this. And then you just have to go back like 6 months ago and what numbers that he was saying, and they're different. And so, but at least it's better than Dan Wallace, who would be looked up to as a guru by these guys. Dan Wallace says the King James is based on 5 manuscripts. And he said Westcott and Hort's text is based on 2,000 manuscripts, which is so ridiculous because, like, only Vaticanus and Sinaiticus were really used, maybe Codex Alexandrinus in Revelation and a couple of tiny little smatterings of other weird documents. So you might be looking at a small handful. But Dan Wallace said that Westcott and Hort used 2,000 manuscripts. They threw out basically, you know, we have 1,990 manuscripts and kept like 10 and mostly just used 2. The rest of them are Byzantine. They basically said no Byzantine text. That was their whole thing. We're getting away from the Byzantine text, and they threw it out. So how could they use 2,000 manuscripts when 99% of them are Byzantine? It goes against their whole principles. And then Dan Wallace said, well, the text we have today, this is in 1995, he said the text we have today is based on 5,000 manuscripts. Well, it sounds so good, but it's not. They throw the Byzantine text in the bin. And so it's impossible for it to be based on that much. It's a bait and switch. They pretend that's our position, that they're pretending that they have our position. So the embarrassment of riches, they're saying, hey, we've got the embarrassment of riches. We've got all these manuscripts everywhere, you know, and it's like, show us the embarrassment of riches. And you open up one door and it's got Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. And they're like, that's the embarrassment of riches. It's like, well, where's the other 5,000? It's like, we'll see that rubbish bin over there. That's where they are. We don't even really bother looking at them that much. They're just a waste of time. Westcott and Hort didn't want them. Metzger, Aylin, they don't want them. We don't really want them. CBGM that's just come out as saying, oh, we still look at them every now and then. You know, it's just because so many people are becoming Byzantine people nowadays. It's like, oh, we've got to get them on board too. But they don't look at these. They don't consider these a reality. They don't consider these as being viable readings. It's like that's the dung hill. That's the rubbish pile. And they couldn't care less if they all burnt up. They only use it as an apologetic to get you in the door. They're like, yeah, we've got the embarrassment of riches. We've got over 5,000 manuscripts now. And you're like, okay, so how many of these back up your Bible? Oh, only like 2. And even they're really different from each other. It's like, well, what about the rest of the manuscripts? oh, well, they kind of back up the King James, but we don't want to talk about that because that sort of gets in the way of a really good story. That's $1 billion industry. We don't want that to ruin the Bible industrial complex. We don't want Logos Bible software to lose money, or the Bible societies to go broke or anything like that. We want this. We're on the gravy train here. This is where the money's coming from. We don't want to, kill the goose that's laying the golden eggs. We want this story to keep happening so that the coin can keep flowing and we can keep our jobs.
But we have just over 5,000 more Greek manuscripts that have been dug up and have been analyzed and have been transcribed and translated and so on and so forth.
They've been transcribed and translated and so forth. No, most of them have not been transcribed. Most of them have not been translated and so forth. The thing even called the majority text in the 1980s was based upon 300 manuscripts. Now, I'm not sure what the number is for the Robinson Pierpont or for what would be called the Byzantine priority text, the majority text type of thing today. But it's definitely not even the majority. A lot of the time they're not even, they don't even know what some of these manuscripts say, and they don't really care. It's not really, they're sort of doing it to fill in the footnotes of their apparatus. So it's like they've got their main text, which is basically Westcott and Hort with a different haircut. They've got their main text there, and down the bottom they've got the apparatus. So they're checking these things and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, it's only just to fill in the apparatus. And if it is a majority reading it, like it could be, there could be 1,000 manuscripts that have a reading, and there could be 20 that differ. They'll just put a big M there for majority text, or a BYZ for Byzantine. They don't even put it all there. I guess if you put it all there, it would just fill up the whole room. But it's like they're not that interested in that. So it just becomes, well, that's a majority text reading. We don't go, we're not majority text people. We're not Byzantine people. So we follow the critical text, and that's in the main text anyway. So when they're saying that they've looked at everything, it's sort of like me having a whole thing about, say, Austrian economics and capitalism. Okay, a big story about that in the main text. And down the bottom, I've got all this stuff about, communism and socialism and, different types of, economic concepts, Keynesian economics and all the rest of it. But I have no intention of ever utilizing it or using it, ever. And I guess that could go vice versa. You could have a whole communist manifesto in the main text, but down the bottom, it's like, well, what freedom-loving people want is this, and they want that, and they want free markets. And you could have all that written there, but you have no intention of moving it from the bottom to the top. You've already made your decision on what it's going to be. Now, they change it every now and then. They tweak a word here and there. But it's like it's not like they're considering the majority text of the Byzantine text, or the Textus Receptus is just like, oh, that's just rubbish now. So what was the Bible like 150 years ago is considered the bottom of the barrel. You may as well it's like toilet paper, the Textus Receptus. They talk about it like it's, well, it was good back then. It's sort of like bloodletting. They thought that it would get rid of cancer, so they'd cut your finger and you'd bleed and bleed and bleed, and all your blood would go out, and that would usually kill you. But now we've got science and it's better. They're sort of talking like this, where really what they have is a Vaticanus known by the Reformation and rejected, not copied, not translated. Sinaiticus turns up on the scene, not known, not translated, not used. And these two are the best, and they override everything else that everyone else was using. And so it's just strange.
And so that's not to cast dispersion on the King James Bible, which right. I think is a very well done translation.
What they had back then was good, but it's pretty hard. Bloodletting was probably better than not. Sort of thing. It's like, yeah, they just had rubbish manuscripts back then. And, but what he's not saying is, the 5,000 number, that's all those rubbish manuscripts that I'm talking about. They were Byzantine manuscripts, just garbage. And so these things should just be thrown in the trash. But we use that as our apologetic. Like, we've looked at 5,000 manuscripts and our Bibles are based upon all these manuscripts. No, they're not. It's Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, it's Westcott and Hort, it's Tischendorf, it's Weiss, it's Weymouth, it's Nestle, it's Kurt Aland, it's Bruce Metzger, it's Bart Ehrman. It's a mess.
Especially for its time. We used to have more information.
That's good, right? And so, punchline, don't let anybody make you feel like a JV Christian because you don't read the KJV. There's nothing wrong with the KJV. And if you like to read the KJV, that's fine. But if someone's trying to tell you that you're not getting the fullness that other translations were contaminated with, they don't know what they're talking about, okay? According to the actual data here.
In the 19th century.
So, we don't know what we're talking about. So just listen to that again, because I was sort of reading something while he said that. But just listen to this guy and his take on it. It's like someone like me who comes along, I've got all the facts and stats and figures, and I can show where their basic apologetic is completely wrong. But he's just taking it like, if you listen to someone like me, you're just following deception. Listen to this.
Its time. We used to have more information.
That's good, right? And so, punchline, don't let anybody make you feel like a JV Christian because you don't read the KJV. There's nothing wrong with the KJV. And if you like to read the KJV, that's fine. But if someone's trying to tell you that you're not getting the fullness that other translations were contaminated with, they don't know what they're talking about, okay? According to the actual data here.
According to the data, no, according to Wes Huff, spewing forth the advertising claims of the critical text side, which he's not going to tell you that Unitarians worked with Westcott and Hort on the text. He's not going to tell you that Jesuits, one guy who was in line to be a pope, Carlo Martini, that he worked on the text. He started doing that in 1975. He's not going to tell you that another Jesuit worked on the text of the Nestle Line 29th edition that's about to come out. He's not going to tell you that people who basically believe very similar to Bart Ehrman, but they might still be in a church, that they've worked on the text, like Bruce Metzger and Kurt Aland, liberals. These are architects behind this text. So, but they're never even going to talk about that. They just talk about all this other stuff outside. And so when you turn the mirror around upon them, it's quite amazing who they have allowed into, like a guy he was in line to be a pope, a guy who was a Unitarian working with Westcott and Hort, George Van Smith. Why have they got these Jehovah's Witness type weirdos working on the text? And why do they just put up with it? And how come there's so many Trinitarian verses affected all of a sudden? Because two manuscripts override everything. Okay. So imagine this scenario. Suppose archaeologists discover 5,000 copies of a corrupted manuscript, but they discover only 50 copies of the authentic version. So would the larger number automatically prove authenticity? Well, no, because quantity doesn't prove anything. So this is why they have to say, well, we haven't got quantity on our side, even though they lie and say 5,000 belongs to them where it doesn't, it belongs to us. They have to lie and say that. But they also say that the quality of Vaticanus and Sinaiticus is so much better than the Byzantine stuff that overrides the numbers. Okay, so they'll say we've got 5,500 manuscripts and we're examining them all and we've discovered them and we've got all that sort of stuff. So when you push back on that and you say, well, you don't even use them, they're like, well, the manuscripts that we do use, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, they're older. So that overrides the whole, numbers game. And when you point out, well, they differ from each other, then they usually go to the papyri. But they won't tell you there's a bunch of Byzantine readings in the papyri. Now, if you just read Harry Sturz's book, he talks about the Byzantine readings and the papyri. We don't know what the papyri are. We don't know how old they are. They're being guesstimated to be old. There's a whole bunch of manuscripts that have been proven to be fakes over the years. Just as there are art forgeries, there's a lot of money in these Bibles. I mean, to get an original King James Bible, you could pay, tens of thousands of dollars. Like a Gutenberg Bible is worth over $1 million. So manuscripts, old manuscripts, are worth a lot of money. So there's been a lot of forgeries over the years. People have made a fortune sucking in people. Like, say, the Museum of the Bible, they bought some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They tested them and they're all fake. they tested those things, and that's what should happen to all these manuscripts, because the dating game, what if those manuscripts were proven for some sort of reading in the Old Testament and we changed it, and then it's like, oh, they're fakes. And so that's what we're saying about Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Why don't they test them? Because they're gone too far now. It's like, our whole thing's based on these two. So when you peel back the layers, the apologetic is, we've got this embarrassment of riches. We've got all these manuscripts. They're all on our side. We're checking them. We're doing the science. And you peel back that layer and it's like, oh, no, they're not. 99% of that back up the King James. Even though they're being found later, they've backed up the King James. And so you peel back that and they're like, oh, well, we've got Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. They're old, 350 to 360. Your ones aren't that old. And it's like, okay, so prove to me they're that old. Well, people who are on our side have dated them and said they're old, and it's like, well, yeah, but there's been forgeries and fakes and stuff. How do you know? We've got this scientific ability to test these manuscripts. Why don't you do that? Well, hey, look, there's a bird. It's like, let's just not even go there and talk about that. But then when you peel back that layer and you go, okay, well, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus disagree 3,000 times just in the Gospels alone. How can they both be the best and both be the most accurate when they differ so much? One's Arnold Schwarzenegger, one's Danny DeVito. They're not twins, and they shouldn't even be considered just both Alexandrian. They should be in their own field. But, no, they're Alexandrian. No, they're the best. They, when you squish them together, formulate the Westcott and Hort text. So that's what we're going with, and you just keep peeling back these layers and there's just misinformation all the way through. And so basically, if Wes Huff was to get on this show, he'd say, we have two manuscripts that override everything else, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, and we go with that the vast majority of the time. Every now and then we go for a tiny little spattering of readings from other manuscripts. We don't really even use the papyri that much to go with some of these readings, unless it's already in Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. It might back up one word here and there. So we go, yeah, well, it's in a papyri. Let's use that. But apart from that, we don't. The papyri hasn't really changed the text that much. But we mention it because it sounds cool, but it doesn't really change the text. And so what we should be asking is, when he's saying we found more manuscripts, the real question is, what kind of manuscripts are you actually using? He would say, oh, yeah, well, we're using 0.01 of that. Well, it's not. Well, what about the rest of them? What do they back up? Oh, they back up the King James, the Byzantine text. Okay. And yeah, what kind of manuscripts did you find? Oh, we found Vaticanus, and yeah, it's got weird readings like Jesus didn't just die on the cross. He got stabbed in the side and blood and water came out, and then he kept speaking. So he didn't just die on the cross. He died because of the cross and he got stabbed. Okay, so Jesus got stabbed for your sins, according to Vaticanus. Why don't they just have a whole translation just of Vaticanus or of Sinaiticus? You can't, because their readings are so dumb. You have to squish them together to get proper readings. And let me tell you a little secret. They actually had to go back to the Byzantine to get correct locations, because Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, the people who wrote them didn't really know much about the geography of the Middle East. But the Byzantine text is accurate. It has Jesus going somewhere, and he's going through this other town, which is on the way, where Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have massive mistakes there. And oftentimes, someone like Bruce Metzger who taught Bart Ehrman, of course, he would just say, well, Matthew made that mistake. And Mark made a mistake there. Yeah, instead of saying, no, his manuscripts are silly, have dumb readings, they got stupid readings in them, he would just say, well, no, Mark made that mistake. And so it's quite amazing to watch this happen. So anyway, let's continue.
In the 19th century, we just dug up more.
That definitely makes sense. So when people are reading...
In the 19th century, we dug up more, and 99.9% of all those are Byzantine, which back up the King James. And so, which they throw out, which Westcott and Hort said, we don't want to use Byzantine. So, we simply dug up more. Okay, that's... I'm just trying to think of an example, but anyway, it'll come to me. Let's just continue.
Reading on like ESV, that doesn't necessarily mean it's like the dumbed down version of the King James.
No, definitely not. Because modern translations take into account the breadth of the evidence. So the vast majority. Okay,
so she's like, well, so yeah, reading the ESV is not just like a dumbed down King James sort of thing. No, it absolutely is dumbed down. But it is basically, you've got the King James that was used by everyone. The vast majority of things were used, of Bibles that were used around the world, were based on something just like the King James, Textus Receptus based, King James based. If you look at even like the Russian Bible that they use today, the Russian synodal version, I've got it there on my shelf. There's only 117 differences between that and the King James, and the Russians still use that today. Now they do have modern Bibles because the Bible societies are like, well, you've got to have this sham wow new Bible, sort of thing with all these corruptions in it. And what you'll find is too, a lot of these readings, you read back at early church writers, Origen, and people who had strange concepts, and some of their weird concepts are now in modern Bibles. Some of the things that they were coming against, an only begotten God type of concept, that's in modern Bibles in John 1:18, if you compare those Bibles. And so, Bible Highlighter just said, which ESV? It's like they're what is it, the first one, the second one, that they've got ESVs coming out all the time. Now, I'm all for correcting errors, and, if you can make something better, do it. But oftentimes they're just changing things, and they'll have a certain teaching and a certain doctrine, like the whole concept of a woman ruling over a man in Genesis 3. That has been completely changed now to go back to the King James type of reading. And so oftentimes they're jumping in and out of strange, weird beliefs with the words that they're using. And even in Revelation, it said Jesus, instead of saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, it says, I have become the Alpha and the Omega. And it's like, what, just then? That changes everything. Or Jesus just became the Alpha and the Omega. Whoa, okay, ESV. ESV uses like 250 Septuagint readings. They're overriding the Hebrew with a Greek translation that people in the Reformation period were saying the Septuagint is hopelessly corrupted and it doesn't match up with the Hebrew. It's got these weird readings. We shouldn't go with it. And there's not just one Septuagint, there's a whole bunch. And some of them are really bad. Some of them are okay, but it's like none of them are like a standard. Most people go with the fifth column of Origen's hexapla. But yeah, there's lots of problems. But anyway, let's continue.
Majority of the manuscript evidence that we have, in terms of something like the earliest copies of the papyri, there's the documents written between the 2nd and 4th centuries on papyrus. We're just not, we didn't even know of them. In the 17th century when the king.
So it comes down to, okay, what are the papyri? What are they dated to? Have they chemically tested these dates? If they chemically test them and they're early, cool, we'll deal with that. But we don't know. Are they forgeries? He oftentimes Wes is like, P52, and he gave that to Joe Rogan. Papyrus 1, I notice he's selling them in a frame now. He's written out. But when I go through Papyrus 1, that was claimed to back up Vaticanus back in the day. But I've gone through it, and Papyrus 1 is not backing up Vaticanus in lots of the readings. And it's basically just a page of like most of Matthew 1. And I've gone through and examined a lot of it. And he would just say, well, it's backing up Vaticanus. And Herman Hoskier pointed out there's 17 differences from Vaticanus, but they just claim it as their own. Everything is just claimed as their side. All our arguments, they just claim it all and use it for their apologetic. When you scratch a little bit further, it's like, okay, let's just drop all that. Yeah, we don't look at the Byzantine. Okay, let's just be honest here. We're looking at Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, but they're old. And it's like, well, they contradict each other. Oh, okay, what about the papyri? They just always have this sort of thing where they're not talking about the Byzantine readings in the papyri, because their whole story is the Byzantine text was invented like in the 4th century. That's what they claim. That's what Westcott and Hort said with the Lucianic recension, which no one believes now, but they still believe the ramifications of what Westcott and Hort said. That Lucian, basically, they had a recension. What happened was all the good Bibles that the critical text guys believed were Westcott and Hort type of Bibles. They were burnt and they were destroyed, and all the horrible Byzantine Bibles just sort of ended up everywhere. But what they can't explain is, how did the Byzantine text end up everywhere? And how did it end up uniform everywhere? Now, this is usually what James White says. It only works for the Byzantine text. It doesn't work for Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, 2 manuscripts, does it? But then they add the papyri. We got the papyri. And so we don't know how old the papyri is. We don't know what they are. And we also, these guys aren't acknowledging Byzantine readings in the papyri. And so all the way through, there is just this level of deception. Anyway, let's continue.
James translation. Now, the King James translators would have utilized that if they had it. Right. They just didn't have it.
But they would have utilized it. So how does Wes know this? People like the King James translators, when you get through Erasmus, people like Stunica, Stephanus, Tremellius, Junius, Theodore Beza, they knew manuscripts. They were searching through tons and tons of reading original source documents, reading early church writers, like say Miles Smith. He documented all the readings of the early church writers from 100 to 300, and then from 300 to 600. So he would have been reading through as much original source documentation as he possibly could. And they could recognize if something was a modern day forgery, like someone like Lorenzo Valla. He spotted that the Vatican donation of Constantine was a forgery because he spotted words that were claimed to be around 6th, 7th century. He spotted those words and said, hang on, that they've only been around since like 1100. So he was like a time machine with his ability in Latin. It's like having, imagine having a word, like I'm just trying to think of a word that everyone uses every day and hears it, but say the word gay. Imagine someone 200 years ago saying, well, that fellow, he was gay, he was a homosexual or something like that. You would go, hang on, that definition has only been around since the 1950s. That's an anachronism, using it in that way. So that must be a fake. That guy's from the modern era pretending to write something that's old. And so that's this type of skill that Erasmus, he printed Valla's work. He said he learned Valla's methodology. He was like a time machine. He could look at a manuscript and go, oh, they're using this type of word. It's a modern day thing. Get rid of it. They would probably come to our day and teach us about the papyri and go, yeah, we'll see this reading here and this reading there. That's not a viable manuscript. He looked at Vaticanus and just said it's a back translation from a Latin document like that. Like it's a load of rubbish. And but this is the darling of these guys. Vaticanus is their main thing. Sinaiticus is still very important, but it's Vaticanus is the main one that they want to override everything with. Yeah, so oftentimes, you know, people like James White and others, they like to put, they like to say, well, if the King James guys were here today, they would utilize everything that we're doing. No. They would look at what you're doing and they would see it like I'm seeing it. I'm just a layman and I can point out these glaring contradictions in your stories. The fact that you're lying about using 5,000 manuscripts, the fact that you're lying about the quality of Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, the fact that you're lying that you should be saying that your text hasn't been seen for like over 1,500 years, it just disappeared, but the church continued on and all this stuff happened, but they didn't have the right text. They were using this horrible Byzantine yuck thing.
Right. Yeah. I even think there's something where they said that they were at some point expecting to be more manuscripts discovered and the translation to continue to be updated as more manuscripts are discovered, right?
Where? I'd like a reference to that the King James guys said that. They said what they had was the word of God. Now, see, the difference is when it comes to the 1611 King James, people are like, okay, where was the Bible before then? Okay, well, the Bible was in manuscript form up until the 1450s when printing was invented. Printed texts were not around before then. And it took quite a while for the Greek to be printed because you had to have 1,000 characters in Greek. And so it took a while for people like Aldous and others to create their printing database with all the metal typesetting for the Greek. So someone like Erasmus, with what he did, it was groundbreaking to do a New Testament in Greek. So obviously you got manuscripts, but then he's putting it in a printed form, and then he can give that to everyone, so everyone can have a look at the printed form, and then he's updating that. He does 5 editions, and then Stephanus and Beza, etc. But the reason that it grew over the time of the Reformation was because he's printed it. Now the Complutensian guys printed theirs 2 years before, but it wasn't released until after Erasmus's. But then you've got 2 to look at. Then you've got Aldous in 1518, they've printed theirs. And you've got Wolfgefallis, he's in 1524. And you've got the 5 editions of Erasmus. So everyone's sort of looking at these. They're looking at argumentation of what Erasmus is saying. People are talking about all this because it's just gone from a different technology. It's like the internet's just appeared and they're like, okay, let's put stuff on the internet. So there might be stuff that's got errors in it. And you're like, okay, well, I like what you put up there of, like just say it's a historical document like the Gettysburg Address, but the other one here words it better. I think that's closer to the original. And so people are talking about all that and eventually it gets ironed out. So it just took from the time of the Complutensian guys in 1514 all the way through up until the 1611 for those things to be ironed out. And people are talking about it. People are debating on it. People are, throwing all this stuff out there for the academic community to look at. And people are examining things, people are examining manuscripts. And the thing is, it's not just Erasmus, Stephanus, and Beza. There are hundreds of other people who are just as interested in manuscript collation, looking at different readings. And they've got contact with people still in Constantinople. Like King James was gifted the Codex Alexandrinus. And by the time it arrived, King Charles, who was beheaded, he got it. So King James never ended up with that. And the London Polyglot guys, they did basically a whole section on Codex Alexandrinus, looking at all the readings, examining everything. But they didn't change the Bible. They didn't turn around and say, okay, well, the correct reading is this, this, and this. They showed everyone. But then it was like, okay, well, but we've still got the received text. So even when these manuscripts were coming in, they weren't overriding everything because of one. You know what I mean? You don't look at a herd of cows and you see 5,000 cows and go, well, there's one with a foot coming out the side. It's a mutant. That's how a cow should be. Let's only breed the ones with the one leg coming out of the side. It's like, no, you should really be thinking about this and go with the normal standard. Now, I remember when I was doing some IT work for a friend of mine, he gave me some really good advice. And I've oftentimes carried this through in life. And he said, stick with industry standards. And it sort of stuck with me. Now, every now and then I will venture out of industry standards, because other people are utilizing things. But what he was saying was when we were running our internet servers, we ran Microsoft, okay, because that was the industry standard at the time. So this is like 2008. I know there was a whole bunch of Linux, cPanel stuff happening, but it's like we would just like, let's go with Microsoft. So we learned ASP programming instead of PHP. Now, both of those are industry standards now. Probably PHP is way better. But at the time, we were sticking with the industry standard. Now, I've oftentimes seen, like on job sites and things like that, someone will put a kitchen in, they'll get the stove from Italy, and there's only like 500 of these stoves made, and they get some guy from Australia to put it in. He does the best job he can do, but it doesn't work, or there's something wrong with it. And it's like, or it's not as good as they thought it would be, where they should have just stuck with an industry standard. Because yes, a company that makes 500 of these, or a company that makes 40,000 of these, and they're in they're in a ton of homes in Australia, and people every day are using them, and they know all the problems with them. It's easier to fix. It's easier to work with. It's easier to know where there can be potential problems. And so sometimes sticking with industry standards, it's like if they advertise for a Google phone tomorrow, okay, well, it might be better than the iPhone. It might be better than Samsung, but it's like, do I want to risk it and spend, $1,500 on a phone and then find out that you can't do half the things that I really want it to do? And so sometimes you're like, well, I'll stick with the industry standard. And so this, what we see is 99% of everything is being based on the Byzantine text. These few weirdo texts here and there that have been rejected. Now that people are giving them around everywhere, translating them into English and all these other languages and saying, hey, don't worry, it's the same. There's no doctrines affected. And they're getting these things and going, well, I guess the King James is a bit old. It's harder to read. So I'll go with this new Shamwell thing. Apparently it's the same. And then they're reading through and they wonder why they're getting these liberal things. They're wondering why, so many people are like, oh, you can't judge. You can't, anyone who's divisive is evil, because that's what the modern Bibles say. Even the New King James says that. Reject a divisive man instead of reject a heretic. You should reject a heretic. Like someone who doesn't believe in hell is a heretic. But Wes Huff says they're not. But we should reject a divisive. So that's me. I mean, Jesus caused division among the Pharisees and Sadducees. It says there was a division amongst them because of him. So we should reject Jesus. That's in the New King James. It's in all the other Bibles too. King James has heretic there. So we've got to reject the Savior. But like these type of readings, people go through and they don't realize they're learning and they're studying and they're thinking about these things, and they're not checking the King James, and they're not even recognizing the differences. And then after a while, they look at someone like me and they don't like me. They don't like what I'm saying, because those other Bibles are actually teaching them not to like me, because I'm causing division by saying truth. I'm coming against their favorite guy, their favorite apologist, Wes Huff, so the whole I use Linux, you and me just said that. Yeah, I mean, so Linux came on, and it's like people, like, that's still going, and it's still huge, and a lot of people use it now. But I guess when it first started, I remember saying to my friend, should we use Linux? He's like, who uses it? And that's the thing. If no one else is using it, you're better off just sort of staying away from it. Like, especially like appliances and stuff. But now we've got Google ratings with stars and all the rest of it, and you can go to shopping and it's got all the star ratings. You can usually tell if something's half good. But that's the thing. These manuscripts, they've got, 5-star rating, 4.5-star rating, 5-star rating, all the way through history. And then we get Vaticanus has got a 1-star rating, Sinaiticus is a 1-star rating, and we're like, that's where we're gonna eat dinner, baby. We're gonna go and have some slop from this restaurant that has a 1-star rating, Cockroach City, here we come. And it's like, but they're like, no, it's 5-star. Yeah, or they just say so many of these restaurants are 5-star, but they don't talk about their own. Their own stuff is rubbish. It's been unknown to history.
And so in regards to that, yeah, an ESV is taking into consideration the breadth of the material.
Cool.
And something like the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Those were discovered between
Let's add the Dead Sea Scrolls into this advertisement. Like, wasn't he just saying on Rogan, hey, the Dead Sea Scrolls match up with the Masoretic text? But now he's like, but we're utilizing the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's like, okay. And the thing is, are you going to reject everything else and go with the Dead Sea Scrolls? And the thing is, the Dead Sea Scrolls is most obviously not the temple manuscript. It's a copy. Now, one of the things is every king of Israel, they were to write out the Torah. Okay, so it's interesting. It's in the Old Testament. It says that if you ever have a king, he should write out the Torah. And so at least he would have known the Bible. And so, but perhaps it's something like that. Perhaps, the Dead Sea Scrolls are just people they were interested in that. They copied it out, but they copied it sloppily, or maybe they were a cult and they wrote in a few of their own little things. A lot of people say it goes to the Essenes, and they had a whole bunch of weird and strange doctrines. And so are we going to just override things with the Septuagint, with the Targums, with the Sumerian Pentateuch, with these type of things? Or are we going to go with the industry standard of the Masoretic text? Who are we trusting to do this? To say, well, this Dead Sea Scroll reading is better than what you have in your Bible today. And that's the problem. You get an NIV, and 20 years later, they've got these different readings in them. And it's like, oh, we went to the Septuagint, or scholarship's gotten better. No, usually it's scholarship's actually getting worse, and it's getting more funky, and it's getting more ecumenical. It's getting stranger, and they're basing things on corrupted manuscripts. They've got corrupted definitions, corrupted texts, corrupted Bibles. And, it sort of gets to the stage where it's almost like anything goes now.
1946 and 1957.
I mean, that's very recent, guys.
And so we just know more now.
Yeah.
It's very recent. Oh, we know more now. Okay, so which reading should override the Masoretic text? Can Wes tell us that? Can he tell us which readings of the Septuagint override the Masoretic text? Because the ESV uses about 250 readings from a translation of the Greek that is terrible, and they override the Hebrew. So they'll make up things like, oh, King James, because there are some weirdo King James ugly guys out there. And they'll say, well, these King James ugly people, they override the Greek with the English, and they'll play this clip of some guy in the back blocks of nowhere, and it's like the King James corrects the Greek, and that's what they'll focus on. They won't play videos like mine that challenge them. They won't go to the best arguments. They'll go to the weakest. That's just what usually happens. But they actually override the Hebrew, the original Hebrew, with a translation, with a Greek translation. Exactly what they accuse us, King James only. They put us in the same bag. They accuse us of proclaiming that. Aren't they doing that themselves? But yeah, now it's the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so they've got to prove to us that the Dead Sea Scroll readings are better than what's in the Masoretic text. But this is just another attack on the Word of God, because they've already attacked the New Testament. Now they're attacking the Old. And who's working on that text? Do we know who are the scholars there? Do they have a bias? Are they Jesuits? Are they Orthodox priests? Are they liberals? Are they people who are atheists and actually go on Bart Ehrman's show? Who are these people? And so this is the issue. And here's Wes Huff on the Joe Rogan show saying, the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls match up, but then it's like, okay, we're correcting the Masoretic by the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's like you can't have both. So anyway, let's continue.
So that's why I say, as time goes on, even though chronologically the 17th century is closer to the 1st century than we are,
right,
the available data that we've been able to analyze and study is just far more in the.
Yeah.
It's far more. Okay, so he couldn't even probably name any of the manuscripts that Beza had access to, except for Codex Beza, 5th century. Erasmus had access to Vaticanus, which he's saying it's sort of like half of his story. The only one that they haven't really had access to is Codex Sinaiticus, that's had any real meaning to their deletions and additions and redefinitions and things like that. But Dead Sea Scrolls, I thought he was the one proclaiming to Rogan that they were the same as the Masoretic text. But anyway,
in the modern era.
Now, Mikhaila goes on to explain how she grew up with Dr. Peterson using some of these Old Testament stories and often, sharing them from the KJV.
Like with my dad.
And so what's amazing is people like Wes Huff will say, whenever I say a verse, it comes out King James Version. Mark Ward, I grew up on the King James Version. That's what I knew. That's what made me into who I am today. James White, I grew up reading the King. How come all of these people can grow up reading the King James Version? And they're sort of like the heroes of the internet. And, Mark Ward's amazing and Wes Huff is amazing, but now you can't use it. And they're telling everyone else not to use it. Use these other ones. But they didn't grow up reading those. You know what I mean? Like, people are like, I really look up to these guys. Well, if you wanted your kids to have the same foundation, wouldn't you get them to read the King James and then later on in life morph into an ESV guy or something like that, But they're just like, no, throw it out altogether. And Mark Ward's like, if you give your kids a King James, it's a sin. He said that in the debate. Isn't that bizarre? But, Wes Huff, he's about to promote Mark Ward big time here. So Mikhaila is saying, okay, when I was growing up, my dad was reading the King James. And I know Jordan Peterson, he's been promoting Bible stuff and courses on the Bible. It sounds pretty Gnostic. And, I don't know where he's at. I don't really follow him. I know there was a lot of controversy about him saying a woman's a woman and, this type of thing years ago, which, at the time needed to be said politically. But, really, I listen to him and it just sounds like a lot of his stuff just sounds too much. He's got too much psychology and psychiatry behind what he says for me to really gravitate towards it. And it's just sort of like, hey, clean your room and do this sort of stuff. And it's like, well, some of the most brilliant people didn't do that. They were just them. And, some things are, he's got his own way of doing things and all the rest of it. And the reason he's become popular and influenced a lot of people. But yeah, so anyway, apparently they've been reading the Bible, reading Old Testament stories. And most of the time when he's confronted about these stories, he'll just say, look, they're just sort of myth, they're allegories, they're just teaching a lesson sort of thing, not this is real history. And so
Dad telling me the psychological significance behind some of these Old Testament stories. He was always reading in the King James Version. And as a kid, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. I'm not really sure what's going on. But then I felt like when I first became a Christian, I felt like I was cheating using the ESV. So I was like,
well, the difference is if you're reading through Old Testament, like you just said, the thing is pretty much all the Bibles are based upon the Masoretic text, okay? It's usually the New Testament where the massive problems occur because of Westcott and Hort and all that they've done. But as we go through time, they're starting to go more and more to Dead Sea Scroll readings. They're starting to go more and more toward Septuagint readings, the Targums, Mishnahs, interpretations from rabbis somewhere. And so they're putting all that in the text now. But most of the time, if you were to get like an older type of Bible, it would be mostly the way that things are translated in the Old Testament rather than the underlying text being completely different. So that's changing more and more as we go through time. But the Masoretic text is usually used. So if you were reading an ESV, you'd probably get the similar sort of story. But then again, I haven't read the Old Testament ESV, and I've read enough of the ESV to go, it's corrupt. It's got bizarre, strange readings. But the thing is, if you were just having a general look like her dad would, that would probably be enough to get the gist that David killed Goliath and there was a flood and this type of thing. But if you're looking at all the fine details, like most Christians do eventually, you would find it wanting. But the thing is about understandability. I understand a 400-year-old book is going to have issues. Now, if she had grown up in an environment where, it was reading the King James all the time, Christian environment, hearing it preached, hearing things talked about, like she would have understood it. Now, I would say if anyone does struggle reading the King James, any Textus Receptus Bible would be way preferable than a modern version based upon the critical text. So jumping to an ESV, it's sort of like, you've got problems with your car, so you're jumping to an e-bike or something. It's like, no, just stick with the car. That there are other cars, they're not as good, but at least you can still drive on the road. This other thing is like another creature. When you get to the critical text stuff, yes, they're more readable, but you're reading stuff that has so many changes, so many weird things. Now, unfortunately, the New King James is really bad with the Old Testament. There are a lot of changes. Now, I would just suggest that, like, I've worked on the King James Version 2023 edition, which is only New Testament. So if anyone struggles reading the King James in the New Testament, you can get that. Now, New King James came out 1979 with a New Testament, and that's obviously 1982. They've done the Old Testament, but that is probably where I would say, look, if you struggle, if you're not going to read the Bible because of the King James issue, well, at least go to that. At least, you know what I mean? But don't venture on into these other Bibles like that. They will just leave you confused. You'll see contradictions. You'll see stories like how if someone's raped, you have to marry the rapist. That's in the NIV, it's in the ESV, but it's not in the King James. In the King James, it's two consensual people. And so that these readings cause people to doubt. They cause people to become atheists. They read those things and go, God, oh, that's what God's like. And they get all this doubt in their mind, and they don't realize it's because they're following these modern Bibles with all these horrible, despicable readings. And so you'll just see contradiction after contradiction. And like, sure, most people don't really read the Bible thoroughly. So they usually listen to preaching, they listen to someone teaching, but they usually aren't reading the Bible for themselves. And if they do, they're not thinking that hard and studying it that hard. But if you do intend on doing that, I would just say, just start with the King James. Just get an audio. Just play it on YouTube, audio King James Bible, and listen to it. After a while, you get very familiar with it, and you'll actually enjoy it. And the thing is, James White, he says, I keep saying memory scriptures that are King James. So does Mark Ward. So does Wes Huff. All these guys are saying they've got King James in them. I mean, is that like a contaminant? Have they got AIDS? You know what I mean? Are they going to spread this? It's like it's not affecting them. Apparently, they're still able to do their apologetic work. Apparently, without having this King James foundation. But now they've turned against it. And so what I'm saying is, well, there's nothing wrong with reading the King James.
I get
That's so crazy that anybody would ever feel like they're cheating for using a translation they could actually read. Yikes.
Yeah, but it's not about actually reading it. It's reading something. It's like getting the Constitution of the United States and you don't have the First and Second Amendment in it. It's like, oh, well, I want that in there. You know, there's thousands of words that are changed. There's 8,000 changes. There's 2,900 less Greek words, 8,000 Greek changes, let alone mistranslations and all the rest of it. And so, yeah, to say that sounds so great. Oh, we've got this old Bible that's hard to read. You know, we should get a modern Bible that's easy to read. Yeah, but they're not telling you the full story, that all these deletions have happened and additions and things just made into weird stories. And sometimes that's exactly the same Greek text, but they'll just change it into something and it creates a massive contradiction in the Bible that Bart Ehrman will talk about. And so do you want all that? Do you want the headache? Do you want the mess? Do you want the Gnosticism? Do you want the liberalism? You're going to get that with these new Bibles.
It resonates. It feels good.
Right.
But like, am I doing things, I don't know,
Yeah.
the easy way or something?
So if you're going to, if you do struggle with the King James, just read the New King James. But always remember the New King James does have issues. And if you're going to do an in-depth study, go back to the King James. And there's so many tools online now where you can look up stuff. You know, just jump on, just type it in. Even ChatGPT, what does this, you know, I'm reading through Leviticus, this chapter. What are some of the pitfalls in the King James? Help me to understand some of the archaic words. Sometimes you can read through a whole chapter and you've got no problem. Listen to this. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. How hard is that? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. You know what I'm saying. And the thing is, sometimes these are hard things in the King James get talked about so often that when you actually read through the King James, like I remember watching one of Mark Ward's videos and he was talking about all these horrible, hard readings and all the rest of it. And then he read through some of 1 Corinthians 14. And I read through the whole entire chapter just to get the context. And at the end, I said, did anyone struggle with any of the words that I talked about? In the whole chapter, there wasn't one word that's like, oh, we don't know what it's talking about there. It was clear. It was a whole chapter. And it wasn't like I chose that chapter because it's the most understandable. It's just like oftentimes you'll go through a whole chapter and there's not even one word that you struggle with the King James. Now, I'm not saying that you don't. When it comes to chambering and wantonness and the superfluity of naughtiness, and you're like, oh, what's all that, you know? And you have to look these things up, and then you understand them, you know. But I would just suggest if you're going to segue to a more readable modern edition, don't go out of the Textus Receptus corpus. Stay within the TR Bibles. You know, if someone was reading the MEV, I'll be like, I'm not a fan of the MEV, but if someone was reading that, I'd say, well, they're way better off than reading the NIV or the ESV, you know. So I wouldn't even venture into those critical text Bibles.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to read a King James version, I have no problem with that. But I think there is aspects of the language that is archaic. There's language.
Okay, this is going to be really controversial for you KJV only people.
This isn't the fault of the King James translators.
Right.
There are certain.
So notice he said this is going to be really controversial for you KJV only people. But why? We haven't seen it as a controversy at all. D.A. Waite, who runs, or he's passed away now, ran the Dean Burgon Society. He has the defined King James, where it's a King James version, and where there are archaic terms, he has it in the margin. Trinitarian Bible Society have an archaic word list of about 700 words, and you can have that in your Bible. So if you come across a word, you just look it up and go, oh, that's what it means. I think they actually came out with a Bible version that had that in the margins as well. Some Westminster one, I can't remember exactly what it was. So, you know, Dean Burgon Society promote the King James since 1979. Trinitarian Bible Society been around since 1831. had to break away from the Bible societies because so many Unitarians joined the Bible societies that they had to leave and form the Trinitarian Bible Society, and they've been promoting the King James ever since, and KJV language Bibles, Textus Receptus Bibles in all languages, and but they both have acknowledged archaic terminology. Even if you go to Chick Track, they'll have a pamphlet that you can get with all the archaic terminology. I mean, I've done an update of the New Testament, saying there's old words, but then someone like Mark Ward comes along like as if he's the only one who's discovered this. No, he's just been saying what everyone admits. There's old, in a 400-year-old book, there's going to be old words. It's not a shock. Everyone's already talking about it. Mark Ward comes along and goes, this is such a big problem. You have to throw the King James in the bin. It's a sin for your kids to read it. And it's like, well, no, we've been going through these words and working out the exact definition. And sometimes, too, we find out that these readings, like in the New King James of Easter being deleted in Acts 12:4, is because of a conspiracy theory that it's a pagan festival, not because of correct definitions that they've had. And so, but yes, it is an older book. It does take a little bit more thought to go through it. I wouldn't say it's impossible to understand. I understand it. It's my first go-to whenever I want to get encouraged by the Word of God, or whenever I'm studying something or defending something, I go to the King James. But to make out that, he's going to talk about archaic words, we're all going to be shocked. No. But everyone is already talking about this. Mark Ward comes along as if no one's talking about it. And we're all pointing up saying the sky's blue, and Mark Ward's in the middle and says, the sky's blue, guys. Don't you realize what that means? And it's like, we already knew that. Now, who are you? And then he started to say words like study. Like, just one example, study. He says, that's a mistranslation. It shouldn't be study. In the King James, it says, study to shew thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. It should say, be diligent. That's what it means. That's what spedalzo means. Not recognizing that spedalzo, even in ancient Greek, spedalzo meant to do diligence of the mind. When it's talking about a philosophical concept, it's talking about spedalzo being a diligence of your mind, which is the word study. Yes, in other places, spedalzo isn't a diligence of the mind. It's a diligent in doing work or something like that, or diligent in digging a hole. Fine. Diligence is fine there. But when it's talking about rightly dividing the word of truth, you're using your brain. And so spedalzo fits in there. And even in modern Greek, if you go to a college or university, it's called spedalzo. That's obviously where you go to study. And so the word study and spedalzo have gone hand in hand ever since ancient Greek. But Mark Ward doesn't mention that. He just wants to say it just means diligent, because the modern Bibles have gone with this diligent reading, because oftentimes then they've got a lexical definition, but they don't realize the contextual definition of rightly dividing the word of truth. That causes the semantic range to gravitate towards the word study instead of just being diligent, okay? Because be diligent to show yourself approved to God. It's like, okay, I've got to run around and show myself approved to God. A workman that doesn't need to be ashamed, you're rightly dividing the word of truth. Instead of looking at the whole context of that and saying, okay, study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, because you're rightly dividing the word of truth. That's what you're doing when you're studying. So where the diligence takes that away, and that's in the New King James as well. So it causes problems. So that when I'm saying, if you struggle with the King James, go to the New King James. But there are these problems. And so that's why I've made the edition that I've done. I've gone through a lot of the New King James problems and tidied them up. And it's a supplement. My edition is a supplement for those who are King James people, but they, some people are like, I can never read. Some people are just absolutely convinced. Like, say this guy who's doing this show today, I don't know who he is, but he might be like, I can't read the King James. I can't read the King James. So he might be convinced to our position one day, but then he's just got this, stronghold in his mind. So it's like, well, at least read that then. And you're getting a better edition than the New King James.
wordages. My friend Mark Ward has an excellent book titled The Use and Abuse of the King James Bible. And in it, he has lists of words that are either outdated or have actually changed their meaning.
Oh,
so
yeah, of course.
You're going to run into words. So the key example that my friend Mark uses is halt. So in the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, you have this kind of grand narrative. Elijah's in this competition. We at my house for our kids, we have this book that's called the God Contest, and it's the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Right, the prophets of Baal, they come and they're challenged by Elijah. You know, if Baal is the god that exists, you try to sacrifice. You put the bulls on the altar and see if Baal can call down fire, burn things up. Yeah. Then it doesn't work. And then Elijah gets them to pour all this water on the altar. You know, really soak it, and then he calls down fire from Yahweh, from God, and then he burns up and there's nothing left. And in the meantime, he's mocking the prophets of Baal. You know, maybe Baal's on the toilet, maybe Baal's gone for a vacation kind of thing. But in the midst of that, the King James translation has this terminology where it says he's talking to Israel and he says, "How long will the halt?" And so you think, okay, well, what does that word mean, halt? Well, if I asked you, Mikhaila, what does the word halt mean?
Like stop suddenly.
Yeah, exactly, right? Halt.
And that's still exactly what it means. The thing is, people, like, because of the German, the movies where Germans are like, halt, who goes there? This type of thing. It usually means stop. But when you've got two legs and one of them has halted, it's stopped, then you limp. Okay? So it does also have that meaning. And so I'm going to show you something remarkable, and this will change everything that you understand about Mark Ward's priorities when we look at the word halt. And so I've shown this before, but I'll show it again in this video. But let's continue. He's going to talk about halt for a while.
Who goes there, kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. But if you look at like an ESV, it says something like, "How long will you go back and forth?"
Oh yeah, that's not the same thing.
And you're like, wait a minute. What's happening here, right?
Okay, now it's important to note that the KJV, there's even updated versions of the KJV, but here is the verse that's in question that Wes is referencing. This is in our Logos Bible software. You guys should all get Logos Bible software, free 60-day trial. I'll show you one of the ways I would use it right now.
Logos Bible software is owned by Faith Life. They run Verbum, the Roman Catholic edition. They sell Bart Ehrman's books. They sell books by the Pope. And so they're just cashing in on Christians. And so I wouldn't support them. But yeah, Logos Bible software, these guys might get a kickback from Logos. I know Mark Ward was working for Logos, and that was one of the things I was throwing at him. How can you work for Faith Life, who are so deeply compromised and have Roman Catholics and say how to pray the rosary and chant to Mary and do all that Catholic stuff? And, so obviously that was not, it's not something that he's really even addressed. He's talked a few tiny little smatterings about how he's a Protestant, not a Catholic. And it's like, okay, but why, they sell Bart Ehrman's books, but then Mark Ward's coming out against Bart Ehrman. And it's like, well, why would you promote something that's selling Bart Ehrman? As like, why don't you just say, get it from the shop, get the Bible from the shop here, or get this other thing from the shop that they're specifically saying Logos. The Catholic edition is Verbum, and they will sell, the memoirs of Pope Francis, who, blah, blah, blah. It's full of trash. And so, anyway, I wasn't going to say that, but that was mentioned. Logos is saying this.
Now, and I have my Bible in 2-year reading plan on there as well. Their new study assistant AI tool is absolutely phenomenal. So check this out. 1 Kings 18:21. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, then follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Okay, so check this out.
So one word, which if you read in the New Testament, it says like Jesus healed the halt and the lame, and he talks about the word halt. And in the context, you can usually get it. Now, if I just go to Google, What did halt mean in 1611? Primarily meant to limp, to be lame, or to walk unsteadily. While it could also mean stop, particularly in a military context, its most common usage in 1611 Bible was to describe physical lameness. Now, just because we don't know that today as our first option, it doesn't mean there aren't other options. And we have words like the word love. You can talk about two people making love, or God loves us, or we love God, or we love our friends, or I love ice cream. Or there's so many different definitions of love, of grace. Like, to learn these things, you'll hear them and say, oh, that's the love means the love of God, or love means sexual thing, you know. And so learning words is just something, when you're a Christian, you just have to do. So once you learn halt, it's not a big deal. Like, and the thing is, they're making out like as if this is just a game changer, that the King James has archaic words in it. But at the end of the day, what Bible was Jesus reading? He was reading the Hebrew text, which had, 1,000-year Hebrew in it, 750-year-old Hebrew in it, had a lot of old words. And people have examined this. The Hebrew and the Greek that's used was probably just as difficult as what we're seeing today in the King James. And so when they're talking about all this stuff, and look, I'm all for things being as understandable as possible, to be as accurate and as understandable as possible. But at the end of the day, Jesus was using terminology when he was speaking the Hebrew Bible that people it would have been a learning curve for them to understand exactly which words, how they were defined. And so it's not that huge a deal if Jesus was able to use 1,000-year-old book, a 750-year-old prophecies from Isaiah, and quote them. It's not a big deal. Like, we have to use some English words that are a little bit outdated. But look at everything else. Nothing else here is not understandable. Not look, unto Mount Carmel, and Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Then said Elijah unto the people, I, even I only, remain a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Like, you understand everything else, like one word out of like 50. And this is like the main word that they're harping on about. And it's like, yeah, sure, I want people to understand everything, but oftentimes the word halt, like, it's been talked about because of Mark Ward so often. People know what it means. It's like, okay, that means limping. If you look at, say, the Potter's Freedom, let's look at that, James White's book. This is James White. Now, he's written the King James Only Controversy, and I've got that book right here. James White. This is where Wes Huff and a lot of these other guys get their ideas from. But let me make that bigger. Potter's Freedom. Look at this. A modern anecdote to Arminianism, a clearly expressed, logical, coherent, biblically faithful alternative to a theology which halts between two opinions. So Kenneth L. Gentry Jr., THD, he uses halts on the front cover of James White's book. So if we can't have it in the King James, then we can't have it on James White's book either. He needs to delete this, and probably we should just read another book. It's a sin to give a child this book because it's got halt there. James White's using this word. Why are we making such a massive fuss about it? And anyway, we'll let Wes and this other guy talk about the halt thing, because they go on for quite a while, and then I'm gonna show you something really amazing, and it'll prove my point 100%.
So this is what Wes is saying. We could take this word halt, we could hit study. It's going to take us back into the original language,
Pasah.
pasha, and to be lame, limp, pass by, sparse. Okay, to become disabled, to waver, to be passed. All right, that's the original word used here. Now, if you go to the ESV, which is what she's asking about, you'll notice that the translation is more modern. How long will you go limping between the two different opinions? Again, you click that word limping, we jump into the original language. It's the original word, right? To be lame, to limp, to jump back and forth. Now, let's jump back into Wes Huff unpacking this for us.
Right?
That's a way different. Yeah.
Until you go to the New Testament and you find out that Jesus does things like he cures, he heals the halt and the blind. And halt in Elizabethan King James language means to be like physically disabled, to stumble, like, and so
It means to stop. One leg has stopped, has halted.
So when Elijah says, "How long will you halt thee?" It's like, how long will you kind of limp in regards to this decision?
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Right.
And so that's one that's even like a word that we would associate with something that's archaic. You know, halt. Who goes there? But we're still getting it wrong,
Wow.
right? And so there.
So everyone who's looked at James White's book, The Potter's Freedom, has gotten that wrong and doesn't understand it, and probably we should throw James White's book in the bin.
Things like that. There are things, there are other words that we just don't use anymore. They're just passages in the King James. So if someone is like starting out and they're just assuming, well, the King James is the Bible, I'll read the King James. I think it's not the worst thing they could possibly do. I just think they're going to be better served with a modern translation that's actually going to be understandable.
So you're going to understand it, but it's going to have weird reading. So let me just show you a really good example of this. And so here we have the King James Version, John chapter 5, verse 3 and 4. Amazing story. You know, let's read it. Let's see how hard these words are to understand, okay? In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt. Okay, so the King James has that word. That's hard to understand, you know, okay, well, I understand that. Withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. Now, did you not understand anything there? I mean, some people might go impotent folk, okay, or impotency is something to do with, you know, sexual reproduction, and you know, maybe withered. They might have to look up a couple of those words, but everything else is very clearly understandable, and you get the gist. This is talking about, you know, sick people. Now, if you were going to study through these things, you would just go, okay, well, what does impotent mean? Just grab it. What did impotent mean in 1611? Google says it meant without strength or powerless. Okay, now you know. And withered. Okay, let's look at what did withered mean in 1611. And Google says it meant faded, dried, or shrunk. So you might have people who they got short arms, short legs, they're dwarfs. There's all sorts of problems that can happen with growth. And so all sorts of sick people waiting for the moving of the water. And so we read through the rest of it. There was really nothing else that was hard to understand. But Mark's focused in on halt, okay? So he's saying that's a false friend. Now I'm saying, okay, the word halt, one of your legs can stop, that makes you limp, or else you're dragging your legs along. So one of them has to work for you to be halt. But let's look at the 1611. We'll see if there's any different. Bit of spelling difference. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. Very easy. Let's quickly look at Tyndale, and then we'll look at Wycliffe as well, okay? Tyndale says, in which lay a great multitude of sick folk, of blind, halt, and withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into, it says ye, but that's the word the. It's written sometimes ye, the pool, and troubled ye water. Whosoever then first after the stirring of the water stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. And then Wycliffe says, in these lay a great multitude of sick men, blind, crooked, and dry, abiding in the moving of the water. And for the angel of the Lord came down certain times into the water, and the water was moved. And he that first came down to the cistern after the moving of the water was made whole of whatever sickness he was. Now let's look at the CSB. Now notice these have the underlined words. All of those 42 English words are deleted from the King James. So just think about this for a minute. Let's read. Well, let's go to the ESV. In these lay a multitude of individuals, blind, lame, and paralyzed. Okay, blind, lame, and paralyzed. So yes, halt is updated to lame. Where are the rest of the words? Where's the other 42 words? Where's the whole story? It's deleted. CSV, many sick, blind, lame. Okay, halt is updated. And crippled people came and were lying close to the pool. Okay, Holman Christian Standard has all of that, those 42 words in their version, but they have it in a bracket. Maybe the NIV has it. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. That's it. So, yeah, a lot of these delete them. Jehovah's Witnesses version has the same. It deletes those 42 words. So when we compare the Textus Receptus, it has those words. Westcott and Hort does not have those words, okay? And so while Mark Ward is worried about a false friend of halt, why isn't he talking about the missing 42 friends here that completely erase the story? So it's like saying, you know, Bob went to the shop, but in the real story, it's Bob went to the shop and he bought a shotgun and he bought some bullets and he went and killed 14 people, and now he's on the news as a wanted man. Isn't that different? It's a different story. Like just think, their Bibles don't have this in it. Waiting for the moving of the water, for an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first after the troubling of the water stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. All of that's deleted. 42 words. And most people don't even know it's deleted there. They'll talk about the Comia Henium. They'll talk about the Precopia Adulterae and the last 12 verses a month, but they don't even, like, sometimes there's just these huge chunks of verses that are just gone. Sometimes it's half a verse, like 2,900 Greek words are missing in the underlying text. 8,000 changes. This is just part of that mess. And so while Mark Ward will say, oh, halt is hard to understand, throw your King James in the bin, don't give it to a kid, it's a sin. Okay, but what about the missing, what about the abducted friends? If he's worried about this, some people reading through, and I remember there was one guy, I think it might have been the guy from the Church Split, maybe. Anyway, it was actually Wes Huff. It was Wes Huff himself, and so this will be very relevant. He said that he asked his mother-in-law, what does halt mean? And she said, to limp, like straight away. And so she knew. And he's like, oh, but, you know, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Some people know what this word means. And so, you know, usually some people just have to expand their vocabulary a little bit. And when you're reading a 400-year-old book, if you were reading Shakespeare, you would go, oh, I'm going to look that word up. You don't just go, oh, well, you know, Shakespeare's not working for me. let's just go with Star Wars. That's the same. It's a different story. The story's not in these modern Bibles, but it's in the King James. That's troubling. And this is the words of God here. This is the word of God. They're tampering with the word of God. Do not add or subtract from the words. Are these words supposed to be in there, or are they not? Like, someone try and tell me why the last 12 verses of Mark should be deleted. And usually people come out of doing that study and go, yeah, I think you got a point. There's 2 manuscripts that don't have them. 1,653 manuscripts do. It's like 99.9% have the King James reading there. But apparently, if you follow them, you're in a cult. Okay, that's weird. It is. It's strange. It's weird. Okay, so let's continue.
I was. And I was pretty familiar with the King James, not from like a Christian perspective exactly, but I was familiar with it. But ESV, I was like, there's like less of it's less hard to listen to God, I think, that way.
And one of the problems is, here's her father saying, hey, read the King James. He's reading stories to her. And, where we think he is spiritually or whatever, or her spiritually, like, isn't that an amazing thing that he's reading the King James? She's gotten touched by that. And it's actually caused her, now she's saying she's professing to be a Christian. So isn't that like seed planted in her mind? But now she's like, I want to change. I want to read the ESV. But the problem is she'll get to these contradictory places. She'll get to all these places in Scripture where it's got all those words missing. And she won't have that story in the Bible. She won't have the Comia Hanium. She won't have the last 12 verses of Mark. She won't have the woman caught in adultery story. They'll all be either omitted or if they are in the ESV, which some of these are still in there because they're so embarrassed if they delete them. There's going to be howls from people saying, hey, you can't delete that, my favorite story in the Bible. So they keep them in there because they deeply compromise people. Even Dan Wallace is like, why don't they just delete them all? It's like, well, because they're publishers. They've got an audience that likes the woman caught in adultery story. They don't want it deleted. You can bracket it, you can footnote it, but they don't want it deleted, And they're going to read through some of these stories and go, oh, that's not in the Bible. That's apocryphal. They'll ring up James White. What do you think, James? Well, I think it's a Gnostic story. The last 12 verses of Mark, it's from the Gnostics. Oh, I don't like the Gnostics. I don't want the Gnostic readings in my Bible. And then it's ring Peter Gurry. Oh, it's an apocryphal reading. I don't want the apocrypha in my Bible. And so that they're going to be like, where else is the apocrypha and Gnostic readings in my Bible? And it's going to cause them to doubt. So they're way better off just sticking with the King James, going through the harder words, and because they are going to just face problems. And I've seen this happen. And nearly every person who's on the internet at the moment saying, hey, I'm deprogramming from Christianity, Bart Ehrman was correct. Oh no, that they all talk about how they got to a place where they couldn't justify the readings that were in their Bible, but they were convinced against the King James. They were convinced the King James had problems. The Textus Receptus is the wrong text, so that bridge was burnt. So they got no other alternative but to stay in the critical text mess. And then they're like, hang on, this is a mess. They're just stating the obvious. They're just being honest with themselves. And then they're like, oh, but if this is the Bible, then God's a mess. Then God creates problems. Oh, God. And then they just fall into despair because they've burnt their bridge to the truth. These new Bibles are dangerous.
It's in an understandable language.
And what a horrible thing for, her father has read the King James. What a horrible thing to be given this other thing that says rapists they can marry the person they've raped, because the person who got raped, they have to marry their rapist, according to the NIV and the ESV. So if she reads that, if she unfortunately has that situation happen in her life, she if she was an Old Testament Jew, she would have to marry that weirdo creep. You know what I mean? So she's going to read that story, and she's smart. Her dad's very intelligent. They're going to read through this critically and go, oh, hang on. You have to marry a rapist? That's weird. But if you read the King James, it's two consensual people. It doesn't have that problem. It doesn't have half of these contradictions that Bart Ehrman talks about.
But I was like, maybe I'm being lazy or something. But I like that argument.
Yeah,
I like the halt argument.
Let me show you guys Wes Huff's little Bible translation thing. So we covered this when he talked about it several weeks.
So basically this, I'm not sure if it's from Wes Huff, but this is basically an NASB advertising blurb. I think it was on the back of one of their Bibles or a dust cover or something. And so they bring this out. So they have formal equivalents, word for word, like an interlinear, then the NASB. So of course, NASB is like the best, and then LSB, and then they just go through these. Oh, the King James is like here, but they're not talking about different texts, are they? It's like it's all the same text. But the King James is very, very literal. And who made this? The people who are promoting the NASB. Now, this is Wes Huff's view of this. So he's got the dynamic equivalents and paraphrases. So really, I mean, if it's based on the wrong text, it's like having the Constitution without the First and Second Amendment or something. Okay, well, one's very, word for word. It's a modern edition of that, but we just cut out the First and Second Amendment. It's like, oh, I want everything in there. So if they should actually have, this for critical text, and they should have another one for the Textus Receptus ones, which would only be the King James, New King James, and in this list, that's it. The rest of them are all based on corrupt, terrible text, which is influenced by Unitarians. Westcott and Hort, George Van Smith was with Westcott and Hort making that text with them. He was a Unitarian pastor. Horrible influence, heretical influence. They were hanging around heretics for years, but they're the heroes of, even Peter Gurry has called his son, Westcott, I think it is, or Hort, I can't remember which one. But it's like, man, these guys are viewed as heroes, but they're just, it's unfortunate that people are doing this. That Wes Huff is like, Westcott and Hort were amazing. Mark Ward's like, wow, Westcott and Hort are demonized and people don't like them and they say bad things about them. And it's like, they were bad. They were hanging around like Jehovah's Witness type people who are making Bible translations and deleting thousands of words from the Textus Receptus. And so anyway, so he goes through this
a couple months ago, and he lays out Bible translation philosophies, dynamic equivalents, right? Thought for thought. And you have the NLT here, the NIV, the NAB, right? CSB, and they're more thought for thought. Then you have paraphrase, which is like stuff like the Message. And then you have formal equivalents. Okay, and the best one here is the interlineary, which again is also available in the Logos Bible software. You could see the Greek or the Hebrew in conjunction with a English translation. Then you have stuff like the NASB, the KJV, the New King James. These are more formal in their equivalents. And so Mikhaila Peterson is actually talking about the ESV, which is still a word-for-word translation. I personally love the NASB. But most of my reading, like if I'm just reading for comprehension, I'm probably doing the NIV or the NLT, something that reads smoother. And so here's the punchline. Read the Bible. Read lots of the Bible. But read it in a translation that you can understand it. And don't let anyone, I don't care who they are, tell you that you're a JV, junior varsity Christian, because you're not reading the KJV. There's been countless debates on this. It's a fascinating topic, but the data just doesn't support that KJV is a superior translation. Let me know what you guys think about this.
Okay, and I'll debate him, I'll debate Wes, I'll debate anyone on the planet about my position and win, because it's so easy. All I have to do is just point out the inconsistencies in their argument. They're using this embarrassment of riches argument, which it doesn't add up. At the end of the day, the embarrassment of riches, they try and add like 5,000 plus Byzantine manuscripts to that, which they reject completely. And the thing is, they are not just going with Vaticanus or just going with Sinaiticus. They have to smash them together. And so that creates a never seen before text. And the thing is that there's been like someone like Dean Burgon. He was contemporary with these guys, Westcott and Hort, and he just like if you read his 5 books where he criticizes their Bible, the revised version, and the Westcott and Hort text underlying it, he just goes through them like Epsom salts. He just goes through them, and it's like, man. And he's not even a King James guy. He had his own sort of traditional text opinions, but he had enough bullets to just completely destroy those guys. And so, but anyway, because I haven't been reading through the comments, I can't really. Okay. Yeah, you and me says Mikhaila's probably like, what's up with this dude's obsession with bashing the King James version? Can we move on? Yeah, it's like, let's talk about the Bible. It's like, King James bad. Mark Ward said it's got problems. Don't give it to your kids. It's a sin. Yeah, it's like, okay, so you got to hate the King James, sort of thing. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm trying to read through some of these comments, but they're from ages ago. But I appreciate you guys chatting, and usually I would go through them all. But there was another video about Parbar. Now I'm not sure if it was on the Wes Huff, Mikhaila, Peterson interview, but I found this here. Text and translation. So this is an article by Christian McShaffrey, and he says, introduction, Wes Huff was recently asked to rank his preferred Bible translation, and the King James Version ended up in the last place. But that's typical if you follow the Bible societies and all the rest of it. Even below the Message. And the Message is like, people are saying it's so bad, but he ranks the King James below the Message, which is more of a paraphrase than an actual translation. He stated reason for assigning the King James so low a ranking is there's just enough archaic language in it that there are certain verses that will not be understandable no matter what. This, Mr. Huff says, is not due to the King James translators being wrong, but simply due to the fact that we do not speak 17th century Elizabethan English anymore. To prove his claim of the King James Version's unintelligibility, 1 Chronicles 26:18 is offered as an example. At Parbar, Westwood, 4 at the Causeway, and 2 at Parbar. He quoted the verse at 2 times speed, and everyone had a good laugh. And let us evaluate the substance to his argument. The word itself. I readily admit that the word Parbar is unfamiliar to many, but that is not because it is 17th century Elizabethan English. The word is actually much older than that. It is a transliteration of the Hebrew word that was in common use in the 10th century BC. For those who do not know, a transliteration is when the letters of a word are carried directly over into another language. It is not a translation, but an effort to convey the pronunciation of the original word. A well-known example would be hallelujah. It is a Hebrew word transliterated into English script, allowing the original pronunciation to be preserved. The word Parbar is a proper noun that designates a precinct or suburb of Jerusalem. The Hebrew consonants are PRBR, Strong's 6503, and the King James translators decided to let it stand as a proper noun by transliterating it rather than translating it. The main point here is Mr. Huff's illustration fails to prove his point. The word Parbar may be archaic, but it is not the way he intimates. In fact, and even more calamitous to his claim is the fact that several modern English translations retain the King James Version's reading. Modern translations. The chief aim of modern translations is to replace archaic and Elizabethan words to modern equivalents for greater ease of intelligibility. True, some versions translate parbar as road or colonnade, but just as many retain it. Here are some examples. The American Standard Version, for parbar westward, 4 for the causeway and 2 at parbar. The NASV, at the parbar on the west there, and 4 at the highway and 2 at the parbar. New King James, at pretty much the same. NASV, English Revised Version, Legacy Standard Bible. So they all have parbar. This list proves that there are professional Bible translators who are alive today and do not regard parbar as archaic, Elizabethan, or unintelligible. Conclusion: Mr. Huff is no doubt a very intelligent man, and I regard him as a true brother in Christ, but he simply did not speak the truth in this instance. Christian charity calls us to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I will not impugn on his evil motives. At the same time, I will invite you, my readers, to exercise greater discernment as you consume digital media sometimes. And as was definitely the case here, compelling apologetic arguments are simply erroneous. So I think what happened was I watched the original video that Wes Huff did, this one here, and they mentioned the parbar thing, okay? But what he did was word it a little bit differently and say, oh, we didn't know what parbar meant. And so they just put the word there like, oh, we don't know what it means, and they put it there, which I don't think that's true. And if I had the time, I'd go to the Oxford English Dictionary. Maybe I can just go to the, maybe I can go to here, the King James Bible Dictionary. Is run by a friend of mine. He has Easton's here, a place apparently connected with the temple, probably a suburb. So there you go. This word is considered in 2 Kings. Oops, keeps popping up. Now I can't read it. Oh. That's a problem. How do you get rid of it? A space between the temple wall and the wall of the court, an open portico into the chambers of the official persons opened. Hitchcock says parbar is a suburb. Smith says an open apartment, a word occurring in the Hebrew and authorized version in only in one Chronicles 26:18. So apparently it only appears once. No, it looks like it. No, it looks like it appears twice. It would seem that parbar was someplace on the west side of the temple enclosure, probably the suburb mentioned by Josephus as lying in the deep valley which separated the west wall of the temple and the city opposed to it. Okay, so it doesn't have a whole bunch of other ones, but maybe I can go to Webster's. Okay, that's bar. We want parbar. Okay, so it doesn't look like it actually has that. Am I spelling it right? Where are we? Parbar. But anyway, it's not really even an issue here. I just sort of had that in the background and I was going to talk about it, but I think that's it. Now I'll just check some of my notes here. And so yeah, I think the whole thing is they go through, okay, language changes, words shift meanings. Everyone knows that. King James people aren't in denial about that. We're just like, okay, look it up in a dictionary. So what they're trying to do is, this is a bait and switch. It's got old words, so get an updated version that has completely different readings in many of the Bible stories. Some of the Bible stories aren't even there. It's like, oh, you didn't tell me that. But they try and say, oh, we're only tweaking it here and there. We're getting the best manuscripts, and they're not. And then it's like this bait and switch. Hey, do you want a more readable Bible? Oh, do you want a more readable Constitution? Here's one. It's way more readable than, we the people of the United States, and it's way better. But we omit the First and Second Amendment because you guys don't care about that sort of stuff anymore. But yeah, it's so much more readable. So hang on, no, I'll stick with the one that's a little bit harder, but it's got everything in it. And Revelation 22 says, don't add or subtract from the words. Now, inadvertently, it's saying that you will know where the words are. I know where the words are. Do you know where all the words are? Or do you have to guess which edition of the ESV? Like, even when I was showing that bit that Mark Ward talks about halt, and all those modern versions delete it. Some of them still have it in brackets. Are you sure that it should be deleted? Because if you ring up Dan Wallace tonight and say, should Father forgive them? They know not what they do. Should that be in the Bible? He'll say, absolutely, yes, it should be in our Bibles. Should be in the modern Bibles. It's there. It's in the manuscripts. But if you ring James White, he'll say, no, it shouldn't be in there. We should delete it. And they can't even figure it out. And they're the gurus, aren't they? They're the ones that, Wes Huff holds up the King James only controversy. He's talking about James White, but he'll say, oh, Dan Wallace he's the guru. But they don't know whether that verse should be in or out. Well, they do know, but they're completely different in their opinion. And so Wes Huff is just deeply misinformed. We've found more manuscripts, therefore case closed. They've found more manuscripts that actually back up that the King James translators were correct. That's what they found. Our text is better. The host of this show, God Bless Studios, is completely wrong. I'll debate him. I'll debate anyone who he can find on the planet who wants to debate King James issues, Textus Receptus issues. I'll debate them. And as long as they're, not going to straw man me, or I guess, it's pretty hard not to debate against me and, have to create some sort of fantastical story or just debate about something else that someone else said somewhere and I don't even agree with them. But yeah, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. I have. And I think that's about it. So anyway, guys, I'm going to bail. And I know I sort of am missing going through the comments here. Just looking at these last ones. James White said, I want to know what the apostles said. Read the King James Bible and you will find out what they said right there. Yeah. It's so true. Like, I know what John said. He's like, I want to know what John said. It's like, yeah, you want to know because you don't know exactly. I know what John said. I can point you to those words. Okay. Anyway, guys, I better go. God bless you. I'll play my outro, and we will see you again soon. Here's my outro. Thanks for joining us. God bless you, and we'll see you next video.